bit of a closer eye on the Q&A than I do on the chat. And any questions that go in there will definitely get answered, so long as they're appropriate and relative. So I'm excited here. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics and what I've been doing with my life for about the last 10 years, authoring online courses. And this has been my primary source of income as well for the last 8-9 years of that. So I'm excited to kind of talk about this topic and hopefully help all of you with whatever interest level you have with online courses. So we're going to go through a few things. You said it's me, Joe. Shai, are you just messing with me? All right. Well, that was good. That was good. That was nice. I'm glad that you're bored enough that you tuned in to say hi. All right. I'm gonna go over some intro and overviews of this stuff, and then later on, I'm gonna get revenge on Shai for messing with me earlier in the chat.
Oh, hey, real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to interrupt. If everyone can switch so that they're in the chat window, that it's all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, you're just sending messages to Joe and I.
Yeah. If you go to the chat and you send a message, make sure that it's. I don't know if can you see this in this shared screen now, my chat window.
No, I can't see that. It usually doesn't show that with the Zoom.
Yeah, there's just in the to box, there's like a drop down. So you can set that however you want. All right, so we're going to go over some intros and overs. There's kind of like 3 sections to this. I don't know if we'll cover the full 3 hours or if we'll run out of time. I've never given this presentation this length before. So it'll be interesting to see how far we go and how long it takes. So let's talk about what we're going to learn today. First off, I want to talk about why you would want to do online courses. Then I want to talk about what kind of a course. After we talk about why to do online courses, we'll talk about what kind of a course to actually make. After that, we'll actually go over a sort of a high-level overview of what it's like to put together a course. Then we'll talk about how to put together courses on a more mechanical level. And when we talk about how to do it, we'll talk about what to teach, how to teach, how to use exercises in your course, how to design a course, and then how to actually build it once you've designed the course. And then finally, we'll talk about where to put your course. So the why, what, how, and where. When you're done with the course, where exactly to put it, where to publish it, et cetera, and talk about the options for publishing. So the only word missing from that list is who. So I'm going to talk about just really quickly who I am. I've been authoring since 2011. My first course was published in very early 2012 for Pluralsight. I have over 24 courses on Pluralsight, and I've in total produced several hundred hours of video. I actually have no idea how many hours total of video that I've produced, video courses that I've produced, but it's in the hundreds of hours. Over those 9.5, coming up on 10 years, I've accumulated over 1 million viewers along my courses, and they've spent a total of over 1 million hours. I haven't checked in the last 6 months, but it's probably around 1.2, 1.3 million viewers and hours. Generally, it's about 1 hour per viewer on average. So that's me and who I am. I've definitely been doing this for a long time. In addition to that, I actually spent the last couple of years training people on how to author online courses. I took over as CEO of Thinkster 2 years ago. And in that time, we trained a little over 100 people to author courses. So I've also got a lot of experience training people on how to author courses. We spent a lot of time putting together a whole authoring program for our authors. Try to adjust this camera here a little bit. And So I've got a lot of experience in training people on how to author courses as well. So the question comes up, why bother building an online course? So whatever reason that brought you here to come to this little workshop and learn about building online courses, there's probably a variety of reasons for which you came here, but there might be some reasons, whatever it is that interests you about building a course, there might be some reasons that you hadn't necessarily considered. So I want to kind of cover all the reasons why building a course online is a good idea. So first off, I think that one of the best reasons to build a course is just for your own personal development, right? Building a course is quite an accomplishment just because it takes a fair amount of time and effort to put in. So like all things that you spend time and effort, there's a lot of personal reward that comes from that. The ability to have taken a large project, seen it through to the end, and gotten it finished. And just knowing that you could do that and sit and focus on something so large a task. Second, underneath that same thing for personal development, you also learn a lot when you build a course, not just about the process of building courses, but you learn a lot about the topic that you are teaching. So several of the courses that I built simply because I wanted to learn the topic. Firebase was definitely one of those. I really wanted to learn Firebase, and so I volunteered to, I had Pluralsight commission a course with me to teach on Firebase, and ultimately produced 2 different courses on Firebase from there because I really wanted to learn. There's few better ways to force yourself to learn something than to have a big project and a deadline related to that. So whether that's giving talks, writing blogs, or even doing a whole course, you learn a lot about whatever topic you're talking about when you do a course. Also, there's career development to be had from producing a course. You can get a raise. My own experience here was very visceral because I built my first course, and then shortly after that first course was published, that course was on unit testing and JavaScript. Shortly after that course was published, I had to switch jobs. So I was looking for a new job. And right off the bat, I noticed a difference between how employers were looking at me when I had on my resume that I had a course on unit testing JavaScript, which was very relevant to what the types of jobs that I was interviewing for at the time. And because of that, people definitely saw me, these prospective employers definitely saw me as an expert in that topic. And that made a huge difference. I ended up, due to that, my next job, I started out with getting offers for $10,000 a year more than what I was making before I published that course. And I ended up with 2 companies that I was interested in, and I sort of put them in a little bit of a bidding war against each other and got another $10,000. So I think it was about a $20,000 raise that I got, that I could attribute primarily to the fact that I had produced this course. So that was a really, really big deal. And I think that my own experience has taught me that having taught courses really affects a lot your prospects as an employee. To that same point, I kind of talked about this, but you also are seen as an expert when you've taught a course. So whether or not that matters to your job, or say that you want to speak at conferences, or be able to blog and have established your expertise, having published a course on something really, really matters. As they say, that person wrote the book when they say, yeah, he or she wrote the book on the topic. That's what people sort of see when they see that you have done a course. So it really establishes your expertise. And then finally, there's the direct financial rewards that come from publishing courses. You could definitely make passive income from courses depending on how the financial arrangements are with how you publish them. For most places, they pay royalties, in which case the royalties just sort of come in every month or every quarter as a sort of passive once you produce the course. And that could be really nice to sort of pad the income. But I always tell people when they come and get serious about authoring courses, I say, don't do it for the money, because it's a little bit of a hit and miss. Some courses will do really well. I've had courses that have paid a house payment, and I've had courses that have paid a car payment for a lot of months, many years. And then I've had courses that wouldn't buy me lunch. So you shouldn't do it for the money. but the money should be sort of a secondary thing. But as I said before, sometimes the money can really matter. Like a lot of things, I do think that a big part of that is just publishing a lot of courses. If money is your focus and trying to produce an income, then the ideal thing there to do is probably to publish a lot of courses. And that's kind of like taking a lot of, to use a baseball analogy, taking a lot of swings at bat. Occasionally you're going to hit a home run. So one of the things that I think not the people sort of get confused about is the concept of what is a course. And many people might say, well, that's obvious. I know what a course is. A course is, this thing, and it's out there, and in this case, we're talking about video-based courses. But I know what a course is. I don't necessarily need to talk about that. But there's some aspects about courses themselves that are very important to look at, because if you have the wrong idea as to what the purpose of a course is, then as you produce one, you might produce something a lot less effective than what you could do if you had a better idea of exactly what a course is, what its purpose is. So I want to talk about that a little bit. First off, think back in your mind, what was the last course that you yourself purchased or started? All right? What was the last course that you actually went through? And I don't mean like finished, right? Just either started it or purchased it, even if you purchased it and never once did any part of it, but you made that commitment to do something. So Shane did AWS certification. All right, cool. So I'd like to have everybody throw into the chat, not necessarily what the course was that you did, but why. Why did you decide to either purchase or start that course? For those of you who, there might be people who haven't done this and have not purchased or started an actual course. But for those of you who have purchased or started an actual course, why did you purchase that course? Why did you start that course? So we've got personal development. You're about to start using the technology. Want to get a head start. Okay, good. To learn and use at work. Okay. Personal development in a new direction. To get a certification. Okay, that's a good one. To get continuing education units. All right. Get deeper into technology. Go further in your career. Good, Sarah. Improve your skills. You were between contracts. You wanted to open up new opportunities. John, learning new technology. Okay. You're planning a major upgrade from Angular JS to Angular. Okay. New topic you want to learn and get profound information. Okay. So we've seen a variety of reasons of why the audience here has purchased courses. Now I want you to think, why did you decide to purchase a course or do a course, whether the course is free or paid? Why did you decide to do a course rather than just say, go read blogs, go onto YouTube, etc.? Why was it that you decided to do a course rather than find all the pieces of the content yourself and just consume them? Because that certainly is free. Reading blogs and going onto YouTube, etc. is free. And if you purchased a course, you spent some money. If you did sort of something like Coursera, which was free, maybe you didn't necessarily spend money, but you chose to kind of go through a pre-existing curriculum. Why did you do a course instead of just consuming the content ad hoc? And so, yeah, please type in your answers here. Iqbal says it focuses on the important building blocks. Okay, purchased a course to get a deeper understanding about that one topic. From Michael, I can ask questions. Okay, good one. At the time, it looked like an easier, better structured way to obtain the necessary knowledge. Good, Yauka. I wanted to hear from an expert. Shafa, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. Didn't know where to start. That's really good. Mostly to have more structured information, provides a fast start, might be higher quality. Okay. High rating, known value, and cohesive learning experience. Blogs are often outdated, want an in-depth learning. That's true, Toby. Blogs are often outdated, but courses can get outdated too. Newton, to learn faster. All right. So if you look at the responses of people, Shane, I usually need a project. Nice. Kyle, guided. The heavy lifting, gathering all the information is done for you so you can focus on the content. If you look at these answers, each one of you is kind of like articulated, everybody that answered this question articulated the value of a course versus just the wide variety of information that's out there, right? I like to kind of, let's go through this just a little bit. So I like to break down the types of online learning, and I put these on sort of a scale, right? So for me, on the far end of this scale is Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is a place that I go where I know exactly what I need to know, but I just want to see the exact code to solve usually this one problem, right? I know the problem, I understand the problem, I have scope of the problem, but I just want I want to see either a better code or see how somebody else did that, or I'm not necessarily sure how to do it, but I want to see how to do it with that specific code for one specific problem. Docs are the kind of the next level. Docs are usually you have a bit of an understanding of what you're looking for, but maybe you're looking up an API, something like that. And I mean, when I refer to this, I mean mostly when you consume docs because you're going in and consuming one piece of the docs, not going into the docs for like the tutorial. Then we have blogs. Blogs are a little bit bigger. Sometimes somebody writes a blog about how to do a specific technique that you may not have thought of doing, or maybe they have a technique for doing something that's different than what you'd thought of. So blogs sort of expand this concept a little bit more on focus to being wide and being more of a guide, right? YouTube, then sort of another step up, probably similar to blogs, but just a different format, video versus written. But generally, most YouTube videos are shorter and they focus on one thing and it's somebody showing something. But a lot of times YouTube videos are also more like talks. And then finally, courses. And if we look at these different pieces, you can see a progression from I already know what I don't know, and I just need to know something very specific on the Stack Overflow side. And as you go along this spectrum, ultimately you end up with courses. And courses are generally a matter of I want a guide. I want a guide of some kind. I know I can describe where I want to be, usually in terms of I want to feel comfortable with the technology. I want to be an expert in the technology. I want to be able to do blah. But what most of the time when people take courses, what they don't necessarily are able to describe is the exact steps they need to take to get to where they're going. Sometimes they can, and with some work, they'll potentially be able to figure it all out. But it's a little bit like understanding what city you want to get to, but you don't know the landscape in between here and there. And you just know you want to get to the city. So you want a guide to take you there, and you want to take the shortest route possible, right? You want to be focused in getting to that place. You don't necessarily want to do a lot of meandering, right? And that's the value of a course. And so a course, when you're looking at courses obviously there are always exceptions to the rule, but when you're looking at producing a course, you should keep that concept in mind that what your learner is coming to you for is for you to be the expert to chart out a path, right? And to take them along that path and to give them the right information at the right time as they move along that path and to bring them to the place where they want to go, right? And again, that place is usually described as, I want to be comfortable with blah. I want to know more about blah, right? That place isn't necessarily described as, I want to be able to solve X specific problem, right? They wouldn't necessarily come in and say, I want to know how to do guards in Angular routing. Instead, it's more like, I want to be good at Angular routing. If I'm going to take an Angular routing course, I want to be an expert in Angular routing. That's why they take a routing course, not to learn one specific piece of that. If that were true, they would consume one of these other things. But when they take a course, they want you to be their guide and take them to a specific spot. So keeping that in mind, as that's what your learner is looking for, will help you guide how you produce a course. So it also means that you don't necessarily have to worry about one specific aspect as you're choosing what to cover in your course. It's not necessarily that one specific aspect has to be covered or not, but the most important thing is that you give your learners that comfort, that confidence to get them where they are accomplishing what they're looking for: comfort, familiarity, expertise. So as I said, courses are a guide, like a guide who takes you through there. And people go to courses mostly because it's about how they can define what they want. There are other reasons to take courses, certifications, access to the instructor, depending on the format of the course as well. But they have less ability to find where they want to go, and it's a farther journey that they want to go to. And they always want help. Now, when it comes time to design a course, one of the first things you'll have to do, obviously, is choose a topic. So I always tell authors that I'm training that there's a few things to keep in mind when choosing a topic. The first one is, what do you have interest in and what are you passionate about? So when you're looking at doing your first course or doing any course, always look at what do you care about, what are you passionate about? Next, look at what you have expertise and familiarity with. And then finally, consider popularity of the course. And the reason to keep these three things in mind is each of them play an important part in designing and building a course. If any of these three things is very low, then you're going to introduce additional difficulty in producing the course. So, for example, if your passion is very low about the course, you're only doing it for, let's say that you think that you're going to make a lot of money, but you're doing a course on a topic that you don't really care about. That'll be very difficult. That's just like you're giving yourself a job and it's having a job that pays well, but you hate, right? So you want your passion on the topic to be relatively high. It should be a topic that interests you. This is also really important because building a course is not a weekend prospect in most cases. Usually building a course requires a number of weeks, usually months. So it's a long process. It requires a lot of discipline and continuing to work on that project. And having passion for the topic can help you stay motivated to keep working on the course. Without that passion, that can be very difficult. And one of the worst things to do is to spend 50 or even 100 hours working on something just to give it up and abandon it midstream because you just ran out of steam. Something else came up that was more interesting for whatever reason, and to have wasted that time, other than what you learned while you were doing it, but to have wasted the time that you spent. So passion is very important. Expertise is important. Of these three things, maybe it's the least important. Certainly for your first course, I feel like expertise is very important because otherwise you'll spend extra time doing research. And of that, scale of months that it might take you to produce a course, you don't want to add 1 or 2 or 3 more months onto the process because you don't have much expertise in the topic. Or you also don't want to necessarily increase your feeling that you're doing something wrong, that to reduce your confidence in the topic is what you're building. So start off by building courses on things that you are an expert in. Now, when I say expert, I don't necessarily mean the expert, right? But you should be comfortable with the topic such that you know well enough that when you teach people, you're teaching them correct principles, correct techniques, right? That you're making few mistakes and saying few things wrong. You don't have to know everything about the topic, but you should have some expertise so that you're comfortable with the topic. And the research that you do is more about specific research on, I'm going to teach this thing. Is there anything that I don't know about that? I already know 80% of it, but is there anything I don't necessarily know? I want to make sure that I cover. But you don't have to know everything. And finally, popularity. Popularity matters just because once you finally produce this work, you want to know that people are going to be consuming it. Now, if you produce a great work of a course and nobody ever consumes the course, whether you're selling it or however it's being distributed, you still get all the other benefits that come from producing a course. But the ability to decide, hey, this is good. I like this. I'm getting good feedback. People are watching it. I feel like I've contributed value. That's a really important part of producing something this large. And also the next point would be money. If you are doing this for and can make money off of the topic or off of the course, you make more money the more popular the topic is. Generally, whether that's a commissioned course up front, and you're just getting paid to produce the course, or you're making royalties. The more popular it is, the more money that you'll make. So it's also very important to consider popularity. So don't choose the most, especially as you're starting out, don't choose a highly niched topic. You can probably come up with a lot of ideas for, I just learned how to do this one thing at work, right? And here at work, we had to solve this one specific problem. So now I know a lot about that. Maybe I'll go produce a course on that. Niche topics are better for something like a blog because the few people that want to consume that are going to find it through SEO. Googling your thing, find your blog and read it. But having a large number of people who want to know about some very niche technique or topic is usually not very common, right? So you won't be very popular if you choose a more niche topic. The more introductory level courses are always more popular than more advanced courses, with a few exceptions. And so consider popularity, right? That doesn't mean that you do everything in React, right? And not Svelte, because React is more popular than Svelte. But it does mean that if you are going to if you do decide that you want to do a course on Svelte because you're passionate about Svelte, you may not want to do a course on how to use Svelte with some obscure database, right? Because the combination of those two things will limit your audience to a very small number of people. So instead, choose, within the scope of what you're doing, consider the popularity of what you're building. Once you've decided on your topic for your course, then it's time to look at the curriculum or the content of the course. And in choosing the curriculum or content of the course, there's a few things to keep in mind. The first place to start is what's called Swabats. And Swabat is an acronym that means students will be able to, and then the last S is the plural, because you're going to produce multiple of them. So it's a Swabat. You're going to produce multiple Swabats. I'm going to talk about Swabats here in a minute. So I'm not going to go deeper into that here yet. We'll look at this in a minute. Then length. You want to consider the length of the course that you're going to be producing. The curriculum drives the length, certainly, but also the amount of time that you have to devote to the topic or to devote to producing a course also drives the length, right? So if you know that you can spend 5-6 months on the course, then you can make the course longer. But if you don't have as much time to spend on the course, if you only have, say, 3 or 4 months part-time to work on the course and you want to be done with that, then you might want to cut down on the curriculum or the content. And that reduces the length. So when you design a course, look at, first off, you choose a topic, then choose what you want your students to be able to do when they're done with the topic, and then finally consider how long, as far as in video courses, you're talking about number of minutes of video generally. Some formats of video courses might have other metrics that matter, but the number of minutes of video, and have some idea for how many minutes of video you want to be able to produce. And I'll give you some rules later on that'll kind of help you derive based on the amount of curriculum and that you're producing, how long the video may end up being, or arrange for that. So let's talk about Swabats and what a Swabat is. So Swabat stands for students will be able to blank. And it's a really good idea to sit down when you're designing your course and you're first doing the course itself. And I will send out a copy of these slides, but it's a really good idea to take your own notes while we're going through this. And just fair warning as well, most of what we're going over today in this workshop is not going to be hands-on, because in building courses, there's a lot of other dependencies, software and hardware and stuff that's involved. We're going to do a few hands-on exercises, but mostly this is going to be discussion and lecture today. So that means you should be taking notes as well. A Swabat is a sentence or a phrase that finishes the opening phrase, students will be able to. And it's really important to come up with Swabats for a course that you're going to do, because that lets you look at the course from the end. It lets you decide what your course is going to accomplish. And going back to topic and the value of a course, when you can say a student who goes through this course at the end will be able to do this thing, then you've defined part of where you're taking that student. And it also helps a lot in marketing the course as well, when you can list what they'll be able to do after they're done with your course. But it gives you clarity on what you want the course to cover. So it's called thinking of the course. This is thinking of the course from the end of the course, from the end of what the user is going to have accomplished by going through. And it gives you, I didn't spell scope correctly here. It provides clarity on your scope as you define, these are the 5 to 10 things. And a list of Swabats for a course should not be 30 items, and it shouldn't be 1, right? The ideal number is about 5 to 10. And that's true whether you're producing a 14-hour course or a 45-minute course. the granularity of your Swabats will change based on if it's a 45-minute course or a 14-hour course. But it still gives you this clarity. There are 5 things that I want my students, 8 things, 7 things that I want that my students will be able to do by the end of this course. And that gives you clarity on the scope, because invariably, as you're going through and producing a course, you're going to come up with times when you say, ooh, I'm not sure if I should cover this topic, right? Here's this topic and it's related to what we're talking about. Should I cover this? Or what if students don't know about X as I try to teach them Y? Should I stop and teach them X and give them some information about that? Or, ooh, I just realized that covering this particular topic might be really difficult for me, and I can't think up. Maybe I'm less comfortable with it. I'm not sure. Maybe I want to cut it from my course. Being able to decide if you're going to cut something or add something to your course, you can go back to your Swabats and really look at those and say, is this core to what I'm supposed to be delivering for my students? If it's not core to that, then that's something that you can cut, or it's something you can decide not to add. It doesn't mean, Swabats don't necessarily mean that you're only going to cover exactly what any given Swabat does, but the whole course and all the content of the course leads to that. So if you're, say, going to be talking, if your course, one of the Swabats might be on Angular, and you want students to be able to use template binding within HTML templates, or within templates for an Angular application, that's one of your Swabats. Well, you still might teach them some parts of HTML because they need that in order to use template binding effectively, right? So just because you didn't say, I'm going to teach them these particular aspects of HTML, doesn't mean that you don't cover that in the course, but covering that moves you or accomplishes the goal of giving those Swabats to your students, or providing those Swabats and helping your students actually do that. So let's dig a little bit deeper here into actually designing a course. First off, I already went through this. We just have a duplicate slide. Sorry about that. All right, let's talk about getting a course done. When it's time to get a course done, there's a few things to keep in mind. First off is the time investment that it takes in order to get a course done. Estimating hours and weeks. So there's a couple of rules of thumb that are really important when looking at doing video courses. One of the best rules of thumb that I teach all of my authors that I train is that you should plan on 1 hour of work for every minute of finished video. So if you want to have a course that's, say, 60 minutes long, then you should plan that it will take you about 60 hours to produce that course. Now, some of you may find this shocking. For one reason or another, you may have thought that you could produce a 1 hour course in a few hours. But that's depending on what you're producing and the format of the video that you're producing, that's really not very feasible. Usually it's about 1 hour per minute. Over time, you could get more effective. Me personally, my best courses that follow the traditional course format, I might produce 2.5 minutes in an hour, and my worst one's about 45 seconds in an hour. But after a fair amount of work, 10 years of doing this, myself, I probably average in that 1.5 to 2 minutes per hour. But when I started off, I was very much 1 hour per minute. Now, this includes all the time from deciding to think about the course, doing your initial research, writing down, picking a course topic, investigation, creating these Swabats, creating outlines and demos, and then recording, editing, and finally publishing. This wouldn't include promotion, because you could promote a course forever. But for the actual functional part of producing a course, this is a good rule of thumb, about an hour per minute. You will definitely see variances in there, but that's a good rule of thumb. Now, most people are going to be producing courses in their part-time because they're employed full-time. And so they'll decide they have somewhere between 10 and 20 hours a week to produce a course. So based on this, you can now give yourself a metric for how many calendar months it's going to take you to accomplish a course. So if you're doing a 1 hour course, that's 60 hours. Doing it at 10 hours per week, that's 6 weeks. And in any given 6-week period in the average person's life, you're going to find that you're going to have 2 weeks, maybe, when other things are coming up. You may have a vacation, you may have holidays, you might have work deadlines that come up, whatever that is. But usually in any given 6-week period, 2 weeks are not going to be productive weeks. So I always try to round that up to 8 weeks. I don't think I necessarily talk about this, but as far as your very first course, the correct length or ideal length for a first course, a good length for a course is in between 45 minutes and 90 minutes. So targeting topics you can cover in 45 minutes to 90 minutes. I don't have the bullet point for this, but there's another really good rule of thumb that I like to include, and that is, however long you think it's going to take you to cover a topic, come up with that number. Say that you decide, I want to do a course on X. Let's say you want to do a course on semantic HTML. And you think a course on semantic HTML should be about 30 minutes long. Whatever that number is, you should always double that number. So if you think it's going to take you 30 minutes to cover that topic, you're going to spend 60 minutes. You're going to ultimately create 60 minutes of video to cover that topic. I found this to be true for not only myself, but most of the authors that I've worked with. So coming up with, now that I know the scope of my course and what I'm going to cover, from there I can make a guess as to how many hours of video or minutes of video it might take to cover that. Then I double that, and that is ultimately the length of my course, and that's where I should calculate my time. So if you think it's going to take you 90 minutes to cover a topic and you're trying to go for a 90-minute course, you should double that and consider that it's going to be about 3 hours of video. And if that's way too long for what you're trying to accomplish, then cut your scope down. Go through some of your Swabats and remove some of them and cut the scope of the course down. An ideal course length is 45 to 90 minutes. If it's 45 minutes, you'll probably still end up producing about 60 minutes of video. So it gives you that like 60 to 90, which is 6 weeks to 9 weeks at 10 hours per week. That's 1.5 to 2.5 months. And then add in a couple of weeks for padding, and now all of a sudden you're in the 2 to 4 month range. And that's a good range for your first course. It's still in the right range. That's roughly what it's going to be taking you to produce courses, is this 2 to 4 month range when you're working on them part-time. But it's on the shorter end, and it lets you get through and get that first course done, finished, published, and then decide whether or not you're going to continue on. But if you start on a course that's so long that it's going to take you a year at the current rate of work that you can put in, I can almost guarantee, I would bet money that you won't finish that course. 99% of all people will never finish a course like that. It's too long, takes too much work. There'll be times when they get demotivated, other things happen in life, and they'll end up not producing that course, and they'll have wasted whatever time they did put into it before they get into it. So trying to keep this in that like 2 to 4 calendar months, 45 to 90 minutes, produces generally the best results. If you try to do like a 10-minute course, you're no longer doing a course. You're doing something that's more like a video, right? So that's not really a course anymore, something that's 10 minutes long. So 45 to 90 minutes of course. Give me just a quick second here. So now let's talk about when to do it. I have a few pieces of advice as far as when you're working part-time on a course, when to do the course. You're going to be working probably at night. I highly recommend that if depend on your own circadian rhythms and your own schedule as far as when you're productive, that you try to do it when the rest of your social life is kind of over. So for me, what worked out well was I worked my day job until about 6 p.m. I got home. I had from about 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. that I did my social stuff. That was and family things, spending time with friends and family, and being a dad and that sort of thing. And then from about 10 to 12 is when I worked on the course. Another good, really important piece of information here is that you will, like most programming, having a half an hour to work on a course is a waste of time. You're not going to get anything done in half an hour. Minimum should be 90 minutes. Ideal is about 2 hours. So between 90 minutes and 1.5 and 2.5 hour time block to devote to it. So if you could find either 1 hour a day or 3 hours twice a week, the latter is going to be much more effective. Try to do it at 3 hours twice a week rather than 1 hour a day, 6 days a week. You'll get a lot better results with that. 4 to 5 hours is usually long enough, especially if you already have a job that you're working. That's probably too long. But if you say work 4 days a week and then you have your 5th day to yourself, that day could be entirely, and you could spend 8 hours on your course. That's a great, or 10 hours on your course. That's great as well too. But the larger chunks are generally more effective. Finally, prioritizing the course, and this is its own topic unto itself, but if you're going to embark on such a large journey, right, you should prioritize the thing itself. You should make it a priority in your life. So schedule it, put it on your schedule, whatever it is that works for you, do that to make sure that you prioritize this work. Don't say to yourself, cool, I'm going to do a course and I'm going to get to it when I feel like it and when I got time and when I find that I've got nothing else. You'll never get to it in that case. Instead, make it your number one priority. That doesn't mean you don't take care of other things necessarily first, but you know that no matter what's going on with me and my friends being out, I'm going to leave at the right time so I can get home to work on whatever it is, or I'm going to turn away social opportunities that come up because I'm focused, tonight on doing my piece of the course, right? I'm going to be clear in communicating with my spouse that I'm working on this course. And then at a certain time, we've agreed that time is time for me to work on the course. So prioritize it. Now I want to go over kind of a high-level view of what it means to build a course, and we'll be taking a break shortly after this. So first off, you design the course. We kind of went through that process. You pick the course topic, you write down some Swabats, things like that. Then you produce your demos. So once you've picked out the topic and you've picked out what you want students to be able to do, then you're going to you will want to write up some demos. Don't start recording. You could potentially work on, you've got your outline there. You could potentially be looking at thinking, well, maybe I want to start writing some of my scripts. And if you particularly find that motivating, that's fine. But generally, you'll want to spend some time working on the demos at this point, the demo applications that you're going to do. You produce one or more demo applications. And I highly recommend that what you do is you produce kind of one that covers the entire topic, and then allow yourself, as we go through the course, and we'll talk about this more, to be able to take that one large demo application and be able to make versions of that really enable you to focus on teaching a specific thing. So you might have a version of an application that does, you've got it and it covers most of the topics, but maybe it doesn't cover like route guarding. Because the demo application that you built, route guarding, just didn't really work. You can create a copy of that. You can fork it, do a version of that application that does need route guards for whatever, when the original application didn't. And then when you're teaching route guards, you can show that application. But you're going to work on your demos, and we will talk a lot more about demos here later on. Once you're done with that, then it's time to work on your first section. So a course should be broken up into sections. Even a 90-minute course should probably have 2 to 3 sections. A longer course will potentially have more, but a course should have sections. The right length for a section of a course is usually 20 to 60 minutes of video. So you want to work on that first section of that course and decide this is exactly what this section of the course is going to cover. So if I'm covering an introduction to Angular, the first section is probably going to be the basics of template binding. Right? Maybe I'm going to talk about what a component is as well at that time. But whatever it is, you look at your first section and break up your curriculum into that first section. You can go ahead and do the exercise of breaking up the entire course into those sections if you want to do that at this point. But it's really important to get clarity on that first section and know exactly what things you're going to cover at this point. At this point in the process, you should now have an idea to be able to break down your course into actual clips. You're dealing with a small enough quantity of your course, 20 to 60 minutes of video, that you can now break down your course into clips. And we'll talk about clips and clip length here in just a minute. Once you're done with that, once you've decided and designed that first section of the course, the next thing to do is to create the exercises that you're going to have for the course. We're going to talk more about exercises here in a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of gloss over this at the moment. Then you could start actually recording the videos. Once you have clarity, I know that I'm going to be doing these 10 clips. And your ideas as to how many clips you're going to do in a course, you might plan on 10 and end up with 9 or 14. but you have a fair amount of clarity at the beginning of starting the section as to how many clips you're going to do, what each clip is going to cover, etc. So at that point, you'll go through and record your actual videos. And I won't talk about editing here per se. You might decide to record a video, edit it yourself, and have it completely polished. Or you might record all your videos and then come back and edit them all together. Where your editing is in that process is kind of a little bit up to you. I don't think we're going to be covering editing as a process so much, very, very much. We're going to talk about editing techniques today, but we won't necessarily talk about editing so much as a process. But you'll produce those videos in your first section, and then you just repeat that process. Now that you're complete with the first section, you'll repeat that for the next sections. And then finally, I note down here we have the intros and summaries for each section. So a section groups up some piece of concept, and you're going to give some kind of an introduction to that section and some kind of summary of that section. I always recommend that you do that last, and at least not until the rest of the section is done. You do your intros and your summaries. If not, maybe till the end of the entire course that you go and do the intros and summaries. The reason for this is that you will invariably discover that you missed something when you first were planning it out, and you need to add it, or you're going to remove something you decide you don't need while you're in the middle of building that section. So if you do your intros and summaries right off the bat, you will find that you need to constantly be changing those, mostly intros, sometimes summaries, but you'll constantly be changing and going back and having to update the intros. So I always recommend you produce the meat of the section first and then produce the intro or the summary. So we got a question here. Is it important to build your courses around a central topic, or is it okay to have courses on a wide range of topics? So that's a really good question. That's kind of strategic. As you're considering yourself, if you decide that you're going to spend a lot of time authoring a lot of courses, I'm going to assume what you're talking about here is if you're producing multiple courses, should you produce multiple courses around the same topic, or is it okay to produce multiple courses around a variety of topics? So this is kind of opinion based. I produced a lot of courses around a small number of central topics, but that also kind of had to do with more because of my passion and less because of a strategic reason. Now, there are other strategic reasons you could consider why it's a good idea to produce a lot of courses around a central topic. I'd say in general, if I were to consider the reasons why to produce courses on a central topic, several courses around a central topic versus the benefits of doing a variety, I would say it's probably more beneficial to do multiple courses around a central topic, and they're mostly financial reasons. People who watch one course are more likely to watch the next course if it's on around the same topic, right? So it's easier for you to acquire customers because you acquire a customer to one course, now you can get a customer to the second course. Again, this is more about marketing as well. If you have 5 courses on the same topic, you can bundle those courses together and make it easier to sell access to those courses. So that's another reason. Third, you'll also establish yourself as an expert in that area. The more courses you have in a topic, the more people will see you as an expert in that topic. So there's quite a few reasons why producing a bunch of courses on around a central topic is a good idea. You can also produce yourself a complete curriculum, right? Here's an intro to this topic, and then here's the intermediary course on that topic, and now here's one advanced course on that topic and another advanced course and another one. You could do here's an intro to Angular, and now here's like a best practices course, and now here's a course that's focuses just on routing, and here's a course that focuses just on reactive forms, and here's a course that focuses just on template-based forms. And you create yourself a complete curriculum so people can look at the 5 courses that you've got and say, wow, this is now totally, this is like a super course. This is almost like a micro degree, right? Or something. I'm going to really become an expert in this area by doing all of these courses that this one person produced. So there's a lot of good reasons why you should produce courses around a central topic. Me, I'm not necessarily overly particular about that, other than when it comes to considering taking business concerns. So if you have business concerns based on how you're going to be publishing these courses, then do that. I produced courses around a few topics. I did a fair amount on Angular. I did some courses on Node. I did a lot of courses on testing. But I did a couple of courses on Firebase and some other topics. So I had a small few things, but I would say over half of my courses were on Angular. And some of that was just interest. I got more interested in other topics and decided, I want to produce a course on this topic. So I produced a course on Webpack as an example, because I got interested in Webpack, which didn't necessarily, even though Webpack's used by Angular, right? You don't really need to know Webpack to use it with Angular. So that's kind of my thoughts about producing several courses around a central topic. All right. All right. So it's a good time for us to take a little break. So let's take a 5-minute break here, as we've been for an hour, going for an hour. So let's take a 5-minute break. We're going to be doing some hands-on work in the next section. And so we'll also have some breaks at that point. So we won't do a very long break right now. Shane?
Yeah. I'm here.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm also going to be putting up a quick little poll if you guys want to answer this. It should be awesome. It's just a fun little thing.
Yeah, so the poll should show up, and I think there's a checkbox to allow me to answer the poll as well.
Allow panelists to vote. So yeah, I got it.
Cool. All right, so I have it. We're 2 minutes till the hour. We'll go till 5 minutes after the hour, and then start right back up. So a 7-minute break.
Cool. All right, I've launched a poll, so feel free for everyone if you want to answer. So, all right, break.
Poll about me.
Yes, it is.
And so you commented recently. I don't see. Sorry about before. I thought you knew it was me. Dude, no, you had me going, and I think it's hilarious. All right. So when you want to learn, you don't learn. Here's a scenario I like to lay out. Think about when either you yourself learned to ride a bicycle, or if you happen to have taught a child, mostly child, I suppose some of you might have taught another adult how to ride a bicycle. I can guarantee that no matter how that process went, one thing that didn't happen is you didn't sit down and listen to a lecture about how to ride bikes, and you didn't buy a DVD about how to ride a bike and watch the DVD and then go and do it, right? Teaching is not just talking. And I know we're under the slide of what is learning, but I'm actually talking a little bit about teaching as well. Teaching is not just talking. So if you go and you give a talk, or if you watch a talk, the teaching and the learning that's going on there is minimal to none. Teaching is not just talking, and there's a reason for that. And science, education is a science. We've been studying education as a science for a long time. When it comes to your students, the only thing that matters is that you somehow change your audience. Yes, very true, Shane. Experience. So you need to change your audience. Now, you can look at two different ways that you might want to change the audience. The first is knowledge and skills, and that's the typical way that we think of changing our audience, is giving them knowledge or skills, right? When we give them this knowledge or this skills, the only thing that truly matters is retention. Think, for example, what if I could make you the world's greatest Angular developer for one day? Before I put in that limitation, you're thinking, wow, if I was the world's greatest Angular developer, I'd get raises and I'd get sweet contracts and make a lot of money and do a lot of things and I'd get a lot of popularity. But if it only lasted for a single day, what could you do in a single day with all of that skill and knowledge compared to, years, weeks, years, a lifetime? Very little. And so this is a good thing to keep in mind. There's a difference between short-term retention and long-term retention, right? If I tell you some weird fact, right, or some number, or some statistic, say, for example, the gravitational constant of the universe is 6.33 times 10 to the negative 11th, and then there's some units that I don't really know. But you can probably remember 6.33 times 10 to the negative 11th for a short amount of time. But without actually applying that knowledge in any way, by tomorrow, you'll have forgotten that fact. So short-term memory is not a useful thing to give people. Short-term knowledge is not a useful thing to give people. It doesn't actually change them. The only thing that really matters is what can they do tomorrow? So sitting down and talking for 3 hours, and I'm going to use what we're doing right now as an example, I'm presenting a lot of information for you. You're going to retain some of that information tomorrow. Because we're spending 3 hours together, if you stay the whole entire time, there's some information that you're going to retain tomorrow, but not all of it. So a lot of the information that I'm going to give you, you're not going to have tomorrow. Even with the slides, even with your own notes, a lot of the information that I am spouting out of my mouth is not going to be with you tomorrow. But hopefully there's enough information that retains tomorrow that you are changed for the positive, right? So giving somebody short-term memory isn't very useful. And it's very easy to give short-term memory or short-term knowledge. Let's give a talk, write a blog, do a YouTube video. Those things give somebody very short-term knowledge. Unfortunately, what it also does is, as consumers of that knowledge, we oftentimes sit there and consume this knowledge, get it in our short-term memory, and suddenly think, cool, I got this. Boom, I'm ready to go. And then we go tomorrow to try to do something, and we have forgotten all of what that is. So understanding how to give people long-term knowledge and skills and get the knowledge and skills into their long-term memory, not their short-term memory, is very important. And we're going to talk more about this. The second way that you could change somebody is through an emotional change. So you can help them see the possibilities of something. This is what conference talks are great for. Conference talks let people see possibilities. They don't necessarily do a good job of transferring knowledge and skills, but they do let people see possibilities. Getting inspired, again, conference talks are great at this. You could be inspired once you see something going on in a talk and decide that you want to pursue it. So even if somebody talks a bunch about how to do some very complex technical skill, you'll probably retain very little of the how to do that that technical skill, but you might be inspired enough by what they do that you then pursue that and learn and gain those skills. And finally, you can help them gain confidence by, one, seeing that you figured it out. That can give them confidence. But also, if you give them some knowledge, then by giving them the first step or that first platform of knowledge, you can give them enough confidence to continue on in the journey. That's one of my goals here in this presentation. I'm not going to try, I know that in this presentation, I'm not going to give you a lot of concrete skills and knowledge. But I definitely want you to see the possibilities. I want you to be inspired, and I want you to have some confidence with what skills and knowledge I do give you that you might potentially pursue authoring your own course. So going back to actually retaining, the best way to explain something is to actually do something hands-on. Now, unfortunately, when I'm giving a presentation, a workshop on how to do online courses, there's limits to the number of hands-on things that I can do just based on the mechanics of this. For example, this would not be a good format for me to teach you how to ride a bike. I could show it to you, I could talk to you about it, but those would be very, very, very pale. You need to actually be riding a bike, but I can't guarantee that you have a bike, that you're in a place where you can ride your bike, etc. So I can't really help. This would not be a good format for that. This isn't necessarily an amazing format for teaching exactly how to produce courses and giving you the skills in producing courses. You won't have the software necessarily installed or the hardware ready to go. You won't have a topic ready, etc. So we're limited on what we can do hands-on. So I have to focus in this on that second part, the emotional change, and then try to do as much as I can in the first part, the knowledge and skills. But learning is about what you retain tomorrow. Knowing everything today is useless to you because you can't get everything done in a day. So that's the same thing. That's the same thing that applies to your audience. Giving them a ton of knowledge that they only have for a very short time frame is not very useful. You want them to have that knowledge tomorrow. So your number one goal always with a course of any kind is what's called generation. Generation is an educational principle that basically is what happens when the learner or the student actually generates an answer to a problem. So let me give you a concrete example of that. If I tell you, if I'm teaching you basic arithmetic and I tell you that 2 plus 2 is 4 and that 2 plus 3 is 5, you might be able to memorize those things so that when I say to you, what's 2 plus 2, you can spout back out that it's 4. And when if I ask you what 2 plus 3 is, you can spout back up that it's 5. But if I ask you what's 3 plus 3, you will have to generate that answer to answer that question correctly. Right? You can't just follow along in my footsteps. You can't ride on my coattails. You can't have simply memorized an answer. You will have to generate the answer using the principles that hopefully I teach when I'm teaching you how 2 plus 2 works. I like to do this is my magic trick, right? We got 2 plus 2, and look, that's 4, right? So hopefully you would use these principles that I would teach when I'm teaching you how to do basic arithmetic to generate the answer of 3 plus 3. It's that act of generation, that process when the learner takes principles and applies those principles to come up with the solution. And this applies whether we're doing a mechanical task like riding a bike or throwing a ball. And it applies just as much to things like programming, anything where you solve problems based on principle. When you're riding a bike, the problem that you're solving is how to move the bike forward, how to keep it upright, how to steer it correctly, how to navigate where you're going. When you're throwing a ball, the problem you're trying to solve is the velocity you want to throw it, where you want the ball to go, etc., how to form your arms so you don't hurt yourself. When you're programming, the principles, the problems you're trying to solve might be how to display a piece of data, how to get a piece of data going through. Whatever that problem is, getting a problem and solving that problem is generation. And that's the goal that you want your students to do as much as possible. You want them to be generating the answers to problems. As they generate answers to problems, they are doing the thing. They are getting hands-on experience, and they are learning. And that learning has a high retention rate. I don't necessarily have a slide for this, but passive learning. So the learning that we're kind of engaging in right now, where I'm just talking to you about things and you're listening, you're not really actively engaged so much as with the limitations of what you can be actively engaged as we sit here across the internet. But passive learning has a retention rate of between 7 and 15%. So what all the information that I'm going to give you today that you're consuming in a passive, and we're going to do a couple of hands-on exercises, which will help with this, but mostly you're going to be doing passive learning today. So you're going to retain about 7 to 15% of the information that I give you. If you take some notes and review the slides, you can up that a little bit, but we're not going to approach high numbers. Active learning, on the other hand, gives you retention rates of between 75 and 90% retention. So when you can get your learner to actually do something hands-on, then you have moved their retention rate from at best 15% all the way up to at worst 75%. And if you know basic math, you'll know that that's a 5 times increase. So at Thinkster, we do a lot of marketing based on learn 5 times faster, because all of our stuff, all of our content is hands-on. So you want your students to generate answers. This produces a lot of really good results. First off, as they engage in generation, they're going to get hands-on experience as to so the retention rate is going to go up. Second, tomorrow they're going to remember how to do whatever it is that you did. So you're going to accomplish the true goal that they want you to accomplish. They want you to transfer knowledge and skills to them. That's what they're looking for. That's what they potentially are paying you for, is to transfer knowledge and skills to them. So you're going to accomplish that. But there's another there's 2 more really important things that happen when you do generation. Next, confidence. Because they have done a thing, they will have confidence that they can do the thing. You might be able to think back to experiences in your own life where you learned something, you saw it by seeing somebody demonstrate it, but when it was time to actually apply that, you felt very little confidence in your ability to do what they did, and ultimately you decided not to engage in that thing, right? Maybe you went and watched a talk about how great Svelte is. And you thought, cool, Svelte's cool. And I watched this talk about how to do a basic app in Svelte. But because I was watching the whole time, the next day when I went to sit down and think, oh, maybe I'll try a Svelte app, like, I haven't done it myself. I don't really know. I'm not confident about that. It gets worse when we get to mechanical tasks like riding a bike. But the confidence level is very low when you don't actually engage in the activity. But when the learner does engage in the activity, their confidence level goes up. They know that they have done it at least once, so they have a high level of confidence they can do it again. And finally, the most important thing that generation, well, not the most important, but one of the really important things that they do is by having them walk through the task, doing hands-on and actually have to generate the solution to the problem, you will force them to confront any misconceptions that they may have had as you were talking it through. So, for example, again, if we were doing basic math and I was teaching multiplication and I said, hey, 2 times 2 is 4, the learner may have misunderstood how I was explaining it and thought that the process was just addition. They just did basic addition. So when I said, what's 2 plus 3? They might have thought the answer was 5. And so then when I ask that, what's 2 plus 3? And they come up with the answer of 5, and they look at the correct solution as 6 and see that the correct solution was what they got wrong, they are forced to address this misconception that they had. And in programming, this is very common. You might watch somebody do something and think that the syntax works a certain way. When you go to do it, realize, crap, how do we do this? Oh no. And then you're forced to face these misconceptions and learn those things. So we could talk all day long and users can get misconceptions, misunderstand what we're saying. And those misconceptions and misunderstandings can stay with them up until they actually have to do the task. And then they're forced to face those misconceptions and they will correct them. No, I'm still on the same slide. Sorry, I've been on this one slide here for a while, but this is a really important part. So let's talk about how not to teach. This is a slide that I would love for you to take notes on and change potentially some of your attitudes about what it means to actually be a good teacher. So first off, just talking, which again, irony upon ironies, all I've done so far is just talk at you, right? This is the least effective way to teach, is just talking. Oh, I forgot to note when we talked about retention rates, the worst retention is passive, and then active is 75 to 90%. The only way to get better retention rates, does anybody know the only way to have a better retention rate than active learning, the activity that gives a better retention rate when you want to learn something than active learning? Does anybody happen to want to hazard a guess as to what the most effective activity is if you want to retain something and learn it? There you go. Good job, Inbal. It is to teach. That's actually the most effective. So going back to reasons to teach a course, Yauka, good point. Also, talking is the most tiring thing for attendees as well, right? So how not to teach, just talking. There's a little bit of do what I say, not what I do, right? I'm telling you to be hands-on and not just talk. Part of the reason, of course, for this is just the limitations on what hands-on exercises I can come up with. Second, don't code, right? So if I just sit down and code in front of you, I am not effectively teaching. That's no different than just talking. You watching me code is not effective teaching. Next one, this is the one that I get a fair number of people get surprised by. Because a lot of courses, they will tell you, you could download the code and you can type along with me, and that way you will have done it. And both, in this case, almost always the teacher and the student are being lied to. The teacher is lying to themselves and lying to the students without necessarily realizing it. They're saying something untrue. Lying may imply that they know that it's not true, but they don't understand that what they're saying is not correct. And the student also doesn't understand that what they're saying is not correct. Because when I say, if I'm coding, you code along with me, and now you're doing this hands-on, that is not true. That is absolutely not true. Type along coding is not coding. Because, going back to this slide, type along coding does not involve any generation at all. You are simply parroting out what the user has done. Now, I guess that's only kind of true. It is good typing practice. So if your goal is to become better at typing, then type along courses are great. You will become a better typist. So the thing is, you're not going to necessarily learn the coding very well at all. It's very ineffective for actually learning coding. But if your goal is to become more facile with your words per minute, then that's probably a reasonable one. And if you've ever done this, you probably have those experiences of, folks seeing them typing along as furious and fast as you can, having to stop, or maybe rewind because they flipped the screen and you no longer can see the code that they were typing, right? Now think about that process as well as you're watching a course and you're typing along furiously with them. Have you ever gotten to the end of that video and then you're supposed to like save the code or compile it or whatever and run it and you check out, did I get it right? And you kind of have this moment, did I get it right? Oh, it's right. And then you stop for a second and you think, what the heck did they just say for the last 5-10 minutes while I was typing? I don't know. I was so busy typing that I wasn't listening. This is, in my opinion, tantamount to if you went to a lecture at a university and the professor asked everybody to juggle while listening to the lecture. You're doing a repetitive mechanical task, typing, while you're trying to actually consume the information that the teacher is giving. So this is also very ineffective. So if you are going to produce courses, and this is the vast majority of courses out there, are this type along with me, download the code and type along with me. This is not effective learning and not effective teaching. Another one, this is another pet peeve of mine, is the build the production app from start to finish. Now, I don't want to say that this can't be done, but I do want to talk about the fact that this is another one of these great lies in courses, is that I'm going to teach you X, and in order to teach you X, we're going to build a production app X. And so by the time you're done learning X, you're not only going to learn the principles, but you're going to learn how to build an app in X. This is almost always a lie, whether the teacher realizes it or not, but it's also one of the least effective ways to teach. And there's a few reasons why this is very ineffective. First, it creates major logistical problems for the teacher. Michael, I'll get to what is good. I see your question. I'll answer that here in a minute. When you're doing a build a production app, the needs of an application are different than the needs of the learner. So as a simple example, if I'm teaching Angular and I'm going to lay out all the things that I'm going to teach somebody in an introduction to Angular, and I should know what I'm talking about, as I've produced 4 or 5 introduction to Angular courses now in my life. I teach routing. That's about the 8th thing typically that you teach, because the learner has to know a lot of things before they can really understand and learn routing. They have to know a lot about components and templates and the modules and how modules work and a very fair number of things. When I build an app, routing is, if it's not the first thing that I deal with, it's the second thing that I deal with. The minute I get past one screen, I need routing. So if I'm going to teach you Angular, and we build this app, the app can only have one screen until we cover routing. So now, as a teacher, I have a really difficult problem. Do I force routing in early before you're ready for it? Do I do something weird like say, just go in and copy and paste this code in? I don't want you to try to understand it, but we need it so we have a second screen. That's a really weird, disjointed experience for the learner. Or do I take this one screen and somehow shoehorn in all the different pieces that I need for the learner to see and experience and work through before we get to the routing piece and can finally have, which is not how you build an app, right? Finally, so there's these problems logistically. There's another logistic problem. If I build a whole course where I'm building up an app and then something either towards the end, I realize, oh crap, I made a mistake way back here, then that video and every video on from that now has to be potentially redone. Or if there's an update and it changes something that was taught midstream through the course, that might affect all the later videos as well. So it creates a major logistical problem for you as an author to try to both build the course and keep it up to date. And finally, this theoretical lie that, hey, we're going to build a production app. We all know that's not how apps are built. Apps grow. I build a little tiny piece and then I add a little bit more onto it. And then I keep adding more and more and more, and we grow it out. We don't just sit down and code right from the beginning exactly how the thing actually looks, the code actually looks. So this is just my own pet peeve. I've been a consumer of courses in addition to a producer of courses. At Pluralsight, this was how they actually wanted courses built. So I did it this way at Pluralsight. The 20 or so courses, 22 courses I built at Pluralsight were built like this. And we built up a production app. And it was very difficult on me as a teacher, and I delivered less value to the student. And I've consumed many courses that were built like this. Right. And all that time, I've only seen it done once, and it wasn't by me. I didn't do it correctly or effectively. I've seen it done once effectively. And that was a Rails course that I took where they built an app. And then as soon as they taught you a principle and showed how they built it on their app, they had you do the same thing in your own app that was different from theirs. So that's the only time I've seen it done effectively. But again, that still gives them logistic problems if they have to update the course or find a mistake. So when you're teaching the basics of fundamentals of some concept, you're trying to teach people, not the fundamentals. If you're trying to teach principles, if you're trying to teach principles of how to do something, I highly recommend you don't try to build a whole app front to back in the course. Instead, that you use exercises that focus on teaching that principle that you're teaching right then. And then you have a different exercise, and those two don't have to be directly connected. The one doesn't have to follow the other. It gets rid of all of your logistic problems of, what if I change something in the middle? That's great. You just go in and you just change that one thing. It won't likely affect all the rest of the things that you do, because that one exercise can change. Now, I will talk about when to do these types of apps, the how to build something, because people do want those kinds of courses. I'll talk about that here in just a second, but we've got a couple of comments I want to go through. So, Michael asks, if type along is not good with me, what is better to do? So I think I cover this later, but I'm going to cover this now. Tell the learner to just watch and consume and listen and take notes while you're lecturing, okay? While you're showing your code and showing how to code something up. And then give them a hands-on exercise so they can practice what you did. But just like the math example, you don't teach 2 + 2 and then ask them what's 2 + 2. You teach 2 + 2, but then you ask them what's 2 + 3. So demonstrate in one demo/app and code that up, and then give them something different. Whether that's a different app or the same app, but have them do something else. Hey, I did the H1 binding, but I want you to display this other data down here. So now you have to do this binding, right? And there's a lot of nuance to this, and this gets deep into stuff that we only cover. We don't have time to cover here today. We do cover it in our authoring course for authors, but this gets deep into some other things, is to know exactly how to do that. But that's generally the principle there. Just lecture and then have them do hands-on, but don't have them code along with you. Have them do hands-on exercises that you assign them, just like what you did in school. Your teacher at school, as much as, public schools have their own problems, your teacher at school still mostly modeled good teaching behavior. Teach the concept, give homework that's different than that, and or practice exercises, homework we called it, that's different than that, so they can practice that and cement in the knowledge. All right. We had another comment here. In the Build a Production app, I've been through many of these courses and almost never had it help me solve the problem I was trying to solve by going through the course. I was build an incremental layer of understanding, and usually I had to do some more research out of the fact that it's all my problem. What about more advanced courses? So here we go. We got Shai, who's actually, it's fun to have Shai in here because Shai is actually an experienced course teacher. Shai's probably got almost as many years of experience doing this as I do. Talking about basic knowledge and building something real with it. Okay, so that's a good segue, Shai. I think when I took over as CEO of Thinkster a couple of years ago, this was one of the things that I wanted to solve, was how to effectively go. A lot of people were asking for that. I want to build something, and I want to, you could show me the pieces, but I need to see the pieces in a whole so that I get that confidence level to move on. And that has a lot to do with different learners. Some learners can see a couple of pieces and then just be like, I got it. I know how to put this together in a production app. But other learners just need to have their hand held more. And any given person might need that more in one scenario than in another. You might consume one course, watch some pieces, and be like, boom, I got this. I don't need to see how this works in a production, in quotes, app, because it totally makes sense to me. And you go and you implement that in your production app. But in the next scenario, you might be doing something and you're like, man, I'd really like to see this. So a common one that I got was, I produced a course on the mean stack, Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. And that was one of my more popular courses. And then that course, we built a whole complete app, and we built it up slowly. And people really liked that. I had a slightly different format for that because I actually did, small pieces and then grew them, rather than we're just going to build the front end, just going to build the middle tier, just going to build the back end. So we actually did a bunch of refactoring, which I really liked. But I believe that there is a way to do these production courses in a very effective manner. And I've built a couple of them myself. And that is, first, make sure that the learner has gone through the principles course. The part of, and whether that's the same course, in this section, I'm going to teach you the principles of how to do these things and give you some small hands-on exercises. And I relate this a little bit to math. I loved calculus. Calculus was one of my favorite topics. And so in calculus, right, we learned some of the fundamental underlying principles, and then we got these basically story problems. Right? And the story problems laid something out bigger, and you had to use several techniques together to solve the story problem. So I call this sort of a story problem. And there's a various formats, and this is the way that I myself have experimented with this, is once I've got the course that teaches the principles, then there's a second course, or maybe it's the last half of that course, where we go through and we build a production app together. And I try to make it as much as paired programming as possible. But this is the format that I use. I give the learner an assignment the way that if you were paired programming with somebody, a senior developer might tell the junior developer, all right, build this piece next. Or one developer two developers that are peers might agree, all right, we need to build this piece. Okay, you go ahead and code that up. Like, if we're practicing just basic Angular, it's boom, go use the CLI, new up a course, right? So they have to remember what are the CLI commands to create a project. I meant not course. What are the CLI commands to create a new project, right? And you give them the directions of what to do, but they learned that previously in the other course, and now they're applying that. And in that other course, they still had some hands-on exercises where they practiced it, but now they're applying it in a real-world scenario. They're creating that course. And then this is a important, and we'll cover this again in the teaching section here in a minute, but you should always model correct behavior. So in these courses that I've produced where I do this, I give them the assignment, do this. In the next video, I do the same task and show them how I would have done it. And in something simple like a CLI, there's really only one CLI command. There's generally only one correct way to do it. So I just do it and say, you should have done it exactly like this. But if it's something more coding based where there's several approaches to the problem, if I say, okay, now we need a new route and a new component. So I want you to create a new component that's called this and make the route for it, make sure that it shows up and have it just display an H1 that just says blah. And then the video ends after that assignment. And in the next video, I walk through and I do the same exact things. I said, all right, here was the assignment. So I'm going to go through and do these pieces. And if I did something slightly different from them, they get to see that how I did it slightly different from them. And it can get, fairly subjective. I could say, give them assignment like, all right, collect this information in a form and submit that information over to the endpoint. Well, there's probably 10 very effective ways to do that where the code might be different. And I might do it slightly than them. I might decide to create a service. Maybe they don't. But they can look how they solve the problem first, and then they get to see how I solved that same problem and see if I did it differently from them, how did I do it differently from them? What things did I do different? If they get stuck, right? Because they took that original course before and learned those things, and then they come through and they're trying to practice this in a real world course. They can get as far as they can and then watch me do the correct, and then they can go back and they can finish it up. In this case, we're actually building a full production app from start to beginning and generally linear. And in those cases, I also produce checkpoints of the code so that maybe like a third in, I say, hey, if you haven't been following along or you've gotten lost or your code has diverged from mine a lot, you can use this checkpoint and get back to being exactly where I'm at. And again, the point here is that we're not exactly building a true production app because this is, again, a little bit different than building a true production app. There's a lot more experimentation that goes into building a real true production app. But it takes them that next level, and it's a little bit more hand-holding so that they get the experience of building up an app front to back and seeing all the places where they need to deal with something. But I don't have to worry about two things in the format like this. One, I don't have to worry if I do the same thing 3 times because this particular app that we're building needs them to do the same exact task 3 times. That's fine. In a course where you're teaching things, every time, if you go back and teach the same thing, the learner might be like, we already learned this. Why are we learning this again? But if we're building an app, it's just a matter of we're building this app. We did this page. We're going to do this. We did this reactive form. We're going to do another reactive form and another reactive form. And they're all very similar. And that's okay. I don't have to worry about that as a teacher. So that's one thing that this sort of format does is allows me to not worry about repeating the same thing multiple times. And finally, I don't have to worry about addressing topics in a specific order, right? If at the beginning we do the CLI and the very next thing we do is routing, that's fine. That doesn't work when I teach the fundamentals of Angular. I can't teach the CLI and then teach routing immediately next. But because I know that you have this knowledge, we can go over this knowledge in any order. I wasn't really planning at all to talk so much about this, but this is, in my opinion, fascinating. This is not the kind of course that I recommend if you're looking at building first courses that you do. But if you head over to Thinkster, we have our Angular Fundamentals course, and at the end of the second piece of that, I have one of these courses where we walk through and build it. And so you can get, if you want to check out how I've done this, that's how I approach this problem of how do we actually get the learner some experience. But notice one thing that I've admitted to myself by looking at this. I can't sit down in 2 hours and teach you all of Angular and how all of Angular fits together in apps and how to solve this problem, right? Learning takes time. You are lying to the learner. They're lying to themselves. You are lying, as whether you're consciously doing it or not as an author, to say, hey, in 1 hour, I'm going to teach you all that you need to know. The less time you spend with the learner, the less they're going to retain and the less knowledge they're going to get. So learning takes time and it takes repetition. I speak a little Russian, and Russians have a saying, "Повторение мать учения," which means repetition is the mother of learning. Repetition is necessary. So when you teach them principles, then at least what we teach our authors is to revisit things at certain time intervals. And then once they're done with the principles, they can go on to build a real course, and they're revisiting a lot of the same thing. That repetition is going to help them move forward. And at some point, the learner will leave your instruction to move on into their own. They're either doing an app, or they've gotten a job, finally got the job, or the app that they're doing at work, or they feel comfortable enough they start working on their own personal app and stop working through what content you've given them, which is the ideal. You've let them transition off so that they're driving their learning and they no longer need you so much as the guide anymore. And now they're moving on to blogs and Stack Overflow and official docs. So going back to our lecture here, that is how not to teach, is to not build a production app from start to finish. Yeah, as I said before, this can be done, but I do feel like it's extremely difficult. It puts a lot more requirement and effort on the part of the teacher. And so I don't recommend that you do this. I recommend that you instead create, and we talked before about this, create one demo app and then fork it. So this is what I do. I create usually one big demo app, and then I like using Stack Overflow when I can, because it's easy to just create quick forks on that. And I fork it and I change it around so that it works exactly for this scenario. The other thing that I do is I don't worry about the fact that they're now dealing with an app that somewhere in there has routing and they're just still learning about templating. Yeah, the routing is all somewhere in there, but I've pointed them exactly at, here's the exercise on templating, and do this exercise and get the bindings correct. And they could do that. If they want to start playing around and exploring, they can. I won't stop them from that. But I'm not trying to confuse them by, we got to put some routing in so we can have a second form, and it's too early, so just do it this way. What did I say? Did I say Stack Overflow? I meant Stack Blitz. Yeah. Yeah, Stack Blitz. I love Stack Blitz for this. I also love Stack Overflow, but for different reasons. So yes, it can be done to do this build a production app front to back, but it's very hard on the author. It's very hard to keep that type of a course up to date. And it will force you to make concessions between the learning and the building of the app. And hopefully you always choose to concede on the building of the app and make the building of the app maybe less effective so that the learning is the most effective. Me too, Shai, me too. All right. We talked about when to build these production apps. Give them the foundation first, and then walk through building a production type app. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is get them to the state where you can say they have in their mind the clarity on what the app wants to do, and they know how to work through all of it, right? And so when you were talking about video courses where you can't necessarily truly sit next to them and just help them out when they just need it, we can't quite take them all the way to that point, but we could take them as close to that as possible. All right, it is exercise time, and this is a perfect time. This is gonna take us 15 minutes, and we're also gonna include our break in there. So I want all of you to pick a course topic. All right. And I don't care. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be any course topic. I prefer that it's something technical and potentially something that the other learners in here might have some familiarity with. But feel free to use your own imagination. But pick a course topic. And then I want you to create 5 to 10 of those swabats. We talked about those. Those are phrases that end the phrase. So if I say students will be able to, and then I read the swabat, it sounds like a full English good grammar sentence. Okay. So I want you to choose a course topic, and I want you to choose 5 to 10 swabats on that course topic. And we'll give ourselves about 15 minutes here. And then when we come back from the break, so it's 11 minutes to the hour. So we'll start back up around 2 or 3 minutes after the hour. I'm going to pick a few brave volunteers, and we're going to look at your topic and your swabats, and I'm going to do some critiquing of the topic and swabats that you have. So hopefully we get a couple of volunteers that are willing to put theirs forward. But take 10 to 15 minutes now and do that, and we'll start back up about 2-3 minutes after the hour. If you have any questions, need any direction, feel free to either send me a specific message, a personal message, or put them into chat or in the QA, and if you have any lack of clarity on the assignment.
Cool, and I will stop this poll and then launch a new one in a few minutes here.
Cool.
Let everyone see the results on the. Yeah, I'll share the results in a sec here. I'm just going to let everyone focus on the exercise first.
All right, and I will be back shortly. Definitely enjoyable. Good way to.
Well, and then back to the exercise for people.
Okay, so who wants to volunteer their topic and swabats? I'd prefer to do like go through like 2 or 3 of these if we can.
Yeah, post in the chat here, and I can give you the chance to speak.
Yeah.
Who wants to volunteer?
You can either share it out, or if you want. Okay, Inbal, you're our first contestant on The Price is Right. So if you want, you can either just paste in the text into the group chat, Inbal, or if you want to share out if you're happy to talk and share out your screen. So we'll start with Inbal and then do Sarah.
Okay, I think as a panelist, they can share the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Inbal.
Okay. Sure. Then we'll do Andy third. So Inbal.
Inbal first.
Yeah.
Okay. Inbal should bring him back in. There we go. Okay.
Okay. Inbal. All right. Inbal put his in there. All right. So I'll go through these, and if you want to make any comments, Inbal, just turn your mic on.
Yep.
Okay. So Inbal says unit testing in Angular. And his swabats are students will be able to, 1, learn about the advantages of well-tested code. Okay. Set up a unit testing environment. Create tests for services. Create tests for components. Create tests for pipes. Test asynchronous code. Implement testing best practices. This is really good. One of the things that I always look for in swabats is a swabat too specific or too vague? And right off the bat, I'm not saying that any of these swabats are too specific or vague. You talked about not just the very mechanical stuff, but you also talked about your first one, learn about the advantages, is good because you also thought about helping the user understand the points. So I would say the other thing that I look for in a swabat is a passive verb, right? So looking at 2, 3, 4, let's look at the verbs. Set up is the verb on number 2. Set up a unit testing environment. Very active verb. They can set up a unit testing environment. Number 3, they can create tests. That's 3, 4, and 5 is create tests. Number 5, they can test asynchronous code. Again, a very active verb. And finally, number 6, implement testing best practices. Very active. Your weak verb there is number 1, learn about the advantages of well-tested code. So to turn this into something more active, and this might feel a bit like an academic exercise to just make it more active. But again, as you revisit your Swabats and you're deciding what you want to do, rather than saying that students will be able to learn about the advantages of well-tested code, how about saying that students will be able to enumerate the advantages of well-tested code? So if by the end of your course, a student could list to somebody else, oh, these are the advantages of well-tested code, right? They can get some of that from some of your lecture, but hopefully they also learn some of that as they're going through the course and actually doing these things, right? So that would be my one and probably only major idea to correct what you've put in there, is to change learn to something more like enumerate, or describe. Describes okay. I like enumerate a little bit better, but describes okay.
Thanks.
What's that?
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is good to look at this is that, does this create a well-crafted course, right? If a student could do these things, is there anything else that a student is missing that they should be able to do as they learn those things? Nothing jumps out to me as far as that. So well done. Then we've got, we were going to do Sarah next.
1 sec here.
Sarah posted hers in. Yeah, she has. Okay. Sarah wants to do a course on Angular elements. And so her Swabats are: number 1, students will be able to use the Angular CLI to generate an Angular elements project. Good. Number 2, modify the app module to define a custom element. Very good. Number 3, write a script to build the element files. Number 4, run the element locally in a vanilla.js project. And number 5, interact with the element's inputs and outputs with vanilla.js. Let's see if I can actually bring up just Notepad and put these on the screen as we're talking, and see if I make these big enough so we can all see these. What did I? Or 1. All right. So as I look at these Swabats, a couple of things jump out at me. Your number 2 and 3 are very specific. Now, I don't necessarily have a concept in total. I'm not familiar myself, very familiar with Angular elements. I've never used Angular elements to build my custom component, or what do they call it, web component. So I'm not particularly familiar with this, but my first thought at looking at this is that these ones, especially 2, maybe number 1 could look this way as far as being too specific, but I actually think, the CLI might have a lot of different options for how to generate Angular elements, right? So are these ones really specific, and are these going to be like accomplishable in a single video, where this one, or especially 5, right? This one you might take a whole entire section of a course, 10 or 15 videos to cover. So if this one takes 10 videos and this one takes 1, right? Then there's a specificity issue going on with your Swabats. Now, being that I don't know Angular elements particularly well, the whole scope of what Angular elements are, I couldn't necessarily advise whether or not this is true. But as you're looking at your Swabats, make sure, and I'm not going to say that Sarah actually has this problem or not, but make sure that your Swabats are all on roughly the same level, right? So the previous one about unit testing, they're all roughly the same level, right? Each one would take roughly the same amount of time to accomplish. Some of them are being accomplished throughout the entire course, but roughly the same amount of time, and you'd think of them. But don't have one that's like, students will be able to understand the value of unit testing, and students will be able to create components on the test bed, right? The crawl and create components is something that will take you just 30 seconds to explain how to do, and a very small amount of exercise. But yet the enumerating the benefits is something that you'd spend potentially several videos, and might be the whole course on. So that would be my only comment about that. As far as your action words are great. Use the Angular CLI. Use is a vague one. So as long as when I'm looking at courses that we commission, if they use the word use too many times, I usually want them to try to, and it feels like an English grammar, like come up with more synonyms, but mostly because I don't want the author to default to, well, they can use it. That's good enough, right? More powerful words tend to have more description and can drive the author to make sure that they actually accomplish the goal. Like this one, modify, that's a great action word, great verb. Write, that's a good one. Run the element locally in a vanilla JS project, that one's good. Interact, this one's fantastic. Interacting with the elements inputs and outputs with vanilla JS. So well done, Sarah, on that one. Then we had Andy.
Andy next, yeah.
Yep. Grab his and put those into this. So his is Angular Material, I assume, right?
Yeah, so I am temporarily promoting them to panelists so they can make a comment, or you can unmute your microphone and make a comment if you need to.
Angular Material.
Okay. All right, so number 1, utilize Angular Material's wide variety of UI components based on the my word wrap. There we go. Based on the material design specifications, autocomplete, button, dialog, form field, select, etc. Okay, so I think right off the bat, one of the things you're falling victim to is being overly prescriptive, right? So first off, you list some examples. These are things as, again, this documentation is only for yourself as an author. When we work with our authors, we will go over their Swabats with them. But the only reason we go over their Swabats with them is to help them produce the most powerful thing for them. We honestly don't care, as the publishing company, about what their Swabats are. They don't have to have them approved. We just want the author to have the best, most useful. So a list of examples is more for when you're getting like farther down into the process, right? So you wouldn't need to list this here. For another reason that is somewhere else you're going to be like looking at these things, and if this list grows or shrinks, you don't want that to necessarily be encoded in your Swabat, your guideline. It's a level that you don't necessarily need. So I would take those off. Utilizing a material's wide variety of UI components based on the material design specifications. So the other thing that I see when I look at this specific Swabat is that it's very general and vague. I almost feel like this is more like the statement for the entire course. The goal of a Angular material course is to let the user utilize the wide variety of components based on the material design specifications, right? That's, to me, like almost like the one thing that describes the entire course, not one of 5. So I see this one being particularly vague, but let's look at the other ones and see if that holds true. Next, each material component could be a separate Swabat. This is true. The only time that you should enumerate things is when you're being very specific. So for example, if your course was the 10 best Angular material components, and that was your course, then you could definitely list each one as their own Swabat, right? Your students would be able to use this material component and incorporate that somehow. But again, this isn't documentation for somebody else. This isn't Swabats are not for anyone else. And so I also, when I talk to authors, tell them it's not so important what I interpret when I read the Swabat. What's important is that when you read the Swabat and you interpret what you said to yourself, that is meaningful, and that gives you both a boundary around your course and also gives you an understanding of if you haven't met that goal. So when you use, for example, an action verb is a good one. When you put in the term utilize, right? To you, what it means to utilize blank might be different than what I interpret when I read the words utilize blank. But as long as you have a concrete idea in your mind of what you mean when you say students will be able to utilize blank to do blah, that is very meaningful to you, and it helps you to draw boundaries around what you want to cover in your course, but also know for sure, did you accomplish that Swabat by the time you're done when you have finished your course, did you accomplish that Swabat? Can you clearly look at that and say, yes, students will be able to do that, so long as the student was working through the course properly. So this isn't exactly a Swabat, just more of your comment that, yes, each material component could be a separate Swabat, but you probably also don't need to, right? Instead, if there were, let's dig into that maybe just here in a minute. Let's keep going for a moment. Learn about Angular Materials Component Dev Kit. set of behavior primitives that can help them build UI components. So this is a good Swabat, except for because you cover something that's different than the actual material components, and that's really important, right? In the first two, you talked about using the actual specific components themselves. Here you go into something that isn't the component. So this helps you draw like, hey, did I cover the CDK well enough, right? So you're beginning to draw that boundary and include that into the scope of the course, but your action verb is very weak. Learn about, definitely not what you want. Sometimes things that we teach students are memorization type tasks, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. And it's okay. Sometimes people need to learn things that they just simply memorize. But even in that case, your Swabat shouldn't necessarily be learn about, because it's difficult to know, did the student actually learn about that? Or it's difficult to say that they didn't. Well, if I talked about it, then they learned about it. But is that something that they can do? Always look at a Swabat as, what can the student do with this? What can the student do with the CDK when you're done with this course, right? What is it that about what you're going to teach the CDK that will let them do something? So always keep that in mind. Next, understanding the materials theming system and how to customize and use a pre-built theme. So this one is a little bit easier than the other one to show. This is a very weak verb, but it's easy to fix, right? So here, if we were to make this a more powerful one, it would be, we take the word customize. You had it right in there. Customize Angular materials theming system. And let's see, and use a pre-built theme. So this is kind of a two-parter Swabat. You can put it in two different Swabats or keep it as one. But here is a Swabat that's very powerful. Students will be able to customize the theming system and be able to use pre-built themes. Very powerful Swabat right there. Finally, reference Angular materials documentation and where to find the APIs, examples, and guides to build different UI components. That's a good one. And this gets into one of those ones that's really hard to come up with a really great action verb for this, or action word. When it's like, they need to be comfortable with the docs. I want them to be comfortable with the docs, have seen them and used them, right? So you could put in things like, we'll be able to use the Angular materials documentation to find a specific thing, right? But you end up with a lot of words that are like use, reference, find, sort of a little bit on the weaker side of the action verbs, but still something that you want, because this helps you know, I need to make sure that I cover them in the docs well enough, because that's a really important part of material, right? You got to use the docs a lot and you need to learn how to navigate them. So there we go. I just threw out the word navigate. That's maybe a good action verb to throw in there. Maybe not the first one, but that's a good example of something that can be a little bit harder, but always stay away. When you see yourself doing something like this, learning about, stop and think, okay, what do I actually want the student to be able to do? I don't want them to just have some knowledge, because that's hard to measure knowledge. What can they do with the knowledge, right? And the more that you could do that, the better off your Swabats will be. Any questions or comments, Andy?
No, that's good. I think, if I would do a course like this, it would probably start with like a beginner's Angular material course. That way you can break down all those components. Because there are a lot.
Yeah, there are a lot. You're absolutely right. I'm actually working on a material project at the moment, and there are a lot. Okay, what do we got next? We got Marcin. I apologize. So let's bring Marcin in, and he's doing a Redux Angular and architecture. Okay. So, Marcin, you definitely fell prey to the standard thing. You're listing what you want your course to cover. You're not listing what the student can do, right? So you said, what is Redux? But the way that you should look at this instead is, what can a user do that at the end of your course that they couldn't do before? They might know what Redux is. They may or may not know what Redux is. But can they, say, enumerate the values, the pros and cons of Redux? Can they describe Redux to a new user? Can they justify the use of Redux on a project, right? What can they do with the knowledge that you're going to give them about just what is Redux? You're thinking of it from the standpoint of, all right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to describe what is Redux. This number one, at least, is the beginning of an outline, right? What we don't want as an outline. Whatever your Swabats are, you may not cover them in order. You may think about them in order and list them, and then you may end up actually covering them in order. But the point of them is not to necessarily be in order or the beginning of an outline. The Swabats are if you were to write a test to test the user, the learner at the end of your course, you would want your Swabats to be the guidance for what questions you would put on that test or what tasks you would put on that test. So what kind of problem solves a Redux solution? So I think this is probably just a little bit of English. I assume English is a second language for you, Marcin. And feel free to unmute yourself and talk as well here. So you talk about what kinds of problems does Redux solve, right? And you want the user to be able to solve those problems. So the question here is, are you concerned that they have knowledge about what? So is it that they should be able to analyze a problem and know that Redux solves that problem? In which case, maybe your Swabat is analyze problems and determine if Redux is a good solution for that problem, right? But so that's what you should be looking for in a Swabat like this. When is Redux useful? This one kind of, to me, I see that these two, and a little bit less number 1, but 2 and 3 are kind of the same thing, right? You're talking about what is Redux, what problems does Redux solve, when is it useful, which those two things are interrelated. And maybe as you wrote this out, you had something different in mind than what you actually wrote down here, what I'm interpreting from your words, in which case this is more meaningful to you. But always come out with a Swabat that has action. So for example, identify when Redux is the appropriate solution. Of course, I'm using very flowery English language here, right? These are, again, this is for you. The Swabats are for you and your benefit. So identify when Redux is the right solution, you know. Okay, how to use Angular and Redux. So students will, this one's easy. Students will be able to use Redux and Angular, right? Now, I think the problem here is that looking back at
Redux in Angular.
looking back at your course topic is Redux architecture in Angular. So, and again, I'm just going to try to guess here, Marcin, but what you're probably thinking of this course is a course about the architecture. It isn't necessarily very hands-on, right? This is more of like understanding the Redux architecture. Is that right? I don't know if you, here we go, comment. Yeah. Perhaps as an aided decision making. Okay, so a course about an aided decision making. I did a course like this. I've done a couple of courses. They were by big picture courses. I did a big picture on Angular and a big picture on something else. I can't remember now. So these are courses specifically targeted at like an architect or a development manager, some kind of decision maker, to just get a general understanding. They had almost no hands-on, very little coding. They're just to kind of give somebody a general understanding of a topic and be able to use them as, is this the right solution for our next app? Should we be doing this for our next app? So if that's the kind of course that you're thinking of, like there's a course about decision making, you still need to look at one, do you want them to be able to use Redux and Angular? So students will be able to use Redux and Angular. Is that really the goal, that they can use it? Or they can identify if they want to use it? So you should have clarity about that. And again, the point here is not to produce the right Swabats for a course, but instead to see different variations of Swabats and understand what produces good Swabats and what produces less effective Swabats in various situations based on a course. So this is great that you came up with an idea for a course that is more about decision making. So we could look at Swabats about decision making and just general knowledge, because there's a lot of value in courses like that. My big picture courses are some of my most popular ones over on Pluralsight. So to use Redux and Angular, I'm not really sure about that one, but maybe let's look. So that might not be exactly what you want. You may not want them to be able to actually come out of there being able to use Redux and Angular, but instead to understand how Redux is used. How you might look at identify how difficult it is to implement Redux and Angular, or since Redux is usually often used as the high-level descriptor of which there are multiple implementations, NGRX being one of them, you might have a Swabat that says list the Redux implementations that are available for Angular. right? That would be a good SWABAT to have in a course about decision making, because now you know that you've given the user a knowledge about all of the popular solutions out there. Somebody probably right now is about to publish one more NGRX alternative that is only going to be used by themselves at their company, even though they're open sourcing it. So you can't necessarily give them every solution, but you can say, I want them to know about the most popular solutions. But again, then you don't want to say something like, know about the popular Redux solutions. Instead, you would want them to be able to say, identify the pros and cons of each, enumerate the pros and cons of each, or list. Enumerate is just another word for a list. List the pros and cons of each Redux solution, and maybe be able to choose when to use one solution over another. Those are the types of things you would put into a SWABAT that give you a lot of clarity as to how to accomplish this goal. Looking for potential problems with Redux and Angular. So here we go. This one's easy to make a little bit more powerful, is identify potential problems with Redux and Angular, right? So here this SWABAT this is a great SWABAT. The student will be able to identify the potential problems of using Redux and Angular. Good SWABAT. Finally, a demo. This isn't really a SWABAT. This is more of a note to do a demo. So unless you had something else in there that maybe this meant something different to you, maybe unless you're thinking, oh yeah, I want them to be able to demonstrate the use of Redux in Angular, in which case that'd be a great one. Demonstrate the use of Redux in Angular. Although you'd have to have good clarity on what that means and what your student will be able to do. Is that everybody that volunteered? And that's certainly good on timing to spend this much time. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thank you, those who volunteered to put yourselves on display and let me pick you apart. We all benefited from that. So
Yeah, there's a couple questions in the Q&A as well.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. Instead of students will be able to do X, can I use students will feel confident to do X? Students will know where to put components in the context of modules in Angular. These directions. So this concept of the thing called SWABAT, this actually comes from classic. If you went and got an education degree, you would learn about SWABATs in lesson planning and stuff like that, right? So this is the functionality or the system that your general education degree at a university uses as the SWABAT in this method. Now, varying on that because you feel that it's one or another is okay. I would always encourage you to understand truly what the benefits. So if you really wanted to do something different, I would recommend you read a blog article or two about SWABATs and their purpose, so that by switching to use something different, rather than answering the question, students will feel confident to do X. Maybe that's what you have in your mind, is if they're able to do this, then they are confident that they can do that. And that might be important to you. Whether you switch it or not, again, this is only for you. When you create these lists of things, pick whatever format you want to pick, answer whatever question when you want to answer. That's really up to you. But just understanding what trade-offs you may be making as you vary from the standard, right? And this is just as true in programming as anything else. If somebody teaches you NGRX, that doesn't mean that NGRX is the best solution for everything. A specific app might be better served to not use NGRX, but it's just good to always understand what trade-offs you are making as you vary. So I always recommend, with everything, learn to do the thing itself and then learn when to vary. Learn the rules so you learn when to break them. I've heard that answered, or that said multiple times. Inbal asked the question, as a publisher, do you come up with a course description in combination with the course creator, and how close is it to the SWABAT list? Yeah, good question. So as a publisher, we always work with our authors about the courses themselves. First off, we look at, on our side, Thinkster, we publish a relatively non-overlapping curriculum. So unlike Udemy will publish 8,000 courses that are all the exact same coverage of content, right? They don't care. They're just a marketplace for the most part. They don't care. We care. So we will work with our authors as to what course they're actually going to publish, make sure that we don't have another author that has that course in production or is in the middle of authoring that course, so that we have some clarity there. And we also work with our authors to help them understand what course might likely produce, better royalties and things like that. But then you asked about come up with the course description in combination. So if you talk about the description, if you're talking about like for marketing materials, yes, we do that, and we do a lot more. And when it comes to like actually like descriptions that the learners, for example, Swabats users will never see the Swabats in their original form. Now we might take the Swabats and use them in marketing, and we just change the wording a little bit. By the time you're done with this course, you'll be able to blah, right? And we'll use the Swabats for a lot of that. So same thing with a course description. If we're going to come up with a course description we put into text, right, we will work with the course authors. But that really depends on, are you asking, and maybe you can clarify for me here, Imbal, you're asking about when it comes to marketing content, right? Like things that the user sees versus the author and the material that the author, okay, you talk about marketing. Yeah, we work a lot with our authors to generate the marketing content that we use when we're marketing courses. Yeah, we do that tons and tons. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any more questions before we move on from here? Cool. We're not going to go too much farther before we have another exercise here, and we got just a half an hour left. So we're talking about the most important thing, and then I'm going to speed up what we're doing here just a little bit here to get through the rest of the content. Because I do want to get towards the end pieces, which is about publishing. All right, so what's the value of a teacher coach? I think it's always good to enumerate this with people. When you hire a coach or a teacher, there are really two things that you're paying them for, whether you realize it or not. One of them is for them to instruct you. But the other one is, so if any of you took a piano or learned another musical instrument through a teacher, you'll really identify with this. But the other thing that a teacher does, in addition to teach, is they assign appropriate practice. So when you're learning piano and you're like, I want to learn to play the piano, you don't start off with Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, right? Even if that was what you love and you're like, I want to be able to play this, you can't start with there. You have to start with something simpler, right? The value of a teacher is to understand, based on the knowledge and skills that you have right now, what exercise is the right exercise for you. And so that is something that most courses that exist today don't include. They're only trying to do that first thing is to teach basically the explanation. But they're not saying, based on what you know, this is the type of exercise that will push your knowledge enough that you'll stretch. And the analogy there is a rubber band. A rubber band, if you stretch it too tight, it snaps. So if you give too hard of an exercise, they won't be able to accomplish it. But if you don't pull on it at all, it doesn't, no energy is created. And so no learning happens if you give them an exercise that's too easy. So that's very important. So exercises need to stretch the learner, but not too much. So you should also always give an exercise and then demonstrate the correct solution, and always afterwards. Well, not always. There's a couple of exceptions to this, but give them an exercise and then always give them the solution to that exercise when it is feasible to do so. Sometimes it's not feasible. Sometimes the exercise is customize this, pick a color that you like, right? In that case, there's not necessarily a correct solution so much as you show that you picked blue. But if they pick purple, that's just fine. Sometimes the correct solution to something is very memorization based. So for example, if you're teaching them the CLI and you teach them just the basics of creating a new project, and then you say, now I want you to go and create a project, you've given them the solution before. There's only one correct way to create a basic solution project with no extra flags in the CLI. There isn't 5 ways. So they don't need the solution shown again. You don't need to go back through and say, all right, you did this, let me show you again. They can always refer back to when you instructed them to see the correct solution. But most of the time, whatever assignment you would give them, you won't have given them, if you're being, effective here, give them an exercise that's different than what you demonstrated when that's possible, which again, like with the CLI, that's not generally possible. You could change the name of the project, but that's not really a very meaningful change. So, but most of the time, you're going to give them something that's different, and then you should show the correct solution. Even if you're just showing them one of 10 correct solutions or 100 or 1,000,000 correct solutions, because you gave them something so general that there's a lot of ways to solve it, you show how you solved that problem so they can see. It's called modeling correct behavior. We talked already a little bit about the differences between teaching memorization versus principles, right? Angular CLI versus something like forms or literally any other kind of programming besides CLI type based stuff or configuration. When if you're teaching a course on CLI or configuration, oftentimes there's really only one right answer to problems, and so it's a little bit more challenging to come up with exercises in that case. All right, one more exercise. I'm going to. All right, so I want to do. We have 25 minutes. I really don't. We took a little bit longer than I anticipated it to do this, so I don't think we're going to do this exercise as much as this is like a classic mistake, is to skip the hands-on exercises, right? But I want to come back and revisit this at the end. So we're going to do this exercise last in about 20 minutes. And that way we have time that people that need to leave on time are not going to miss the material, but we'll have at least the exercise and they can do this on their own. Okay, so we're going to come back to this exercise. So I want to talk about the mechanics of course creation, and we're going to this is a lot of just basically plain information. And so the slides, when I'll give you out a copy of the slides, they'll just have this when you decide you want to do this. So start off with hardware. The Rode Podcaster is my favorite. That's what you see here. It's a great mic. It's a good all-around mic. It's not necessarily the best mic for doing courses. But there's also the AKG C520. That's the mic I generally use for doing courses. That's this mic here that goes around the back of your head. It's a totally different form factor of microphone because it actually sits on your head. There's a lot of benefits to doing that, mostly about when you use this, if you use a mic like this, it can obscure your vision of your monitor, and that can make it tough to record. The other one that I recommend is the AKG Lyra, or Lyra. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's very much just like this kind of microphone, but the difference is it sits upwards like this, so it sits a little bit farther out of your range of vision, so it doesn't necessarily obscure your vision so much. Those are all good microphones at a very moderate price point. There are as many microphones out there as you can count, but a really good rule of thumb is never to spend less than about $100 on a microphone. Otherwise, you just won't produce good quality sound. Producing good sound is really important, and a lot of that is positioning. In general, you want your microphone 2 inches from your mouth when you're recording. I don't need it so much when we're talking here because the sound levels are okay and the zoom is cutting down the sound quality anyway. But when I'm actually recording locally and I want to produce good quality sound, I want 2 inches from the mic. One of the reasons is this produces the maximum clear volume in the microphone to reduce background hiss and noise. If I take this mic out here, and now it's about 2 feet away from my mouth, you probably notice a little bit of a difference. This is a very directional mic, so if I point it right at my mouth, it's not too bad as I speak towards it. But so for you may or may not notice a major difference. But in a recording, it'll make a huge difference on the amount of background hiss. We call it background noise. So most microphones, you want them like this. There are certain kinds of microphones. There's some weirder form kinds of microphones, shotgun mics and stuff that are built to be farther away. But generally you want them like this, which means you want them on an arm so that you can position them. Mics that sit on the desk are very difficult to use. They are cheaper because you don't have to buy the arm, which is usually around another $100. This is about a $200 microphone. The arm is, I think, $70 that I have. This microphone also has a built-in pop filter and this is some more advanced stuff. We cover this in our authoring course, but things like plosives and sibilants, pop filters help with stuff like that. But a desk stand mic is really hard to position. So even though they're cheaper, I don't recommend getting a desk stand mic. Mics have a pattern. It's important to understand the pattern. For example, this mic, even though you can see it has places here where it's open. If I talk into the side of it, it's way different than talking into the front. And that's because of the pattern of how the microphone is positioned. And so it's important to understand the pattern. And I talked about volume, getting a high volume level. Clipping is when you talk too loud. And this is part of your software. Your software will help you understand if you're clipping, and it gives you a little bit of, so if I go in here and I talk really loud like this, you may hear this weird distortion. You probably do. That's clipping. The microphone just can't handle, and the software can't handle the amplitude that's coming in, so it clips it, and you want to make sure you're never clipping. So understanding that. And then finally, your environment. Here, I've tried to produce the best possible environment because I was doing this for 10 years. So I have this room in a room, and my computer actually sits outside of the room, so all of its fan noise doesn't exist in here. But you could do a lot to your environment. You could do things like you can buy pads like this and put them up on your wall to produce better sound. Stay away from windows. Windows transmit a lot of sound. Stay away from loud, noisy mechanical things like the fans and position yourself. You can use what's called a baffle. You can get cardboard or some kind of cheap wood and put that up in between your mic and whatever a noise source is. So you could just put that up and put your computer on the other side of it. And now the noise is getting deflected away. And then if it's maybe reflecting off of a hard surface and coming back, you can use some foam. Cheap ways to get foam. These are foam like this on Amazon. Doesn't look like it's expensive until you buy enough to actually cover a room. But if you go down to a cheap place like Walmart or any other kind of like department store and buy the eggshell mattresses, you could buy for $20. You could buy in, maybe 4 of those, and you can cover an entire room in sound deadening foam. So understanding your sound and spending a lot of time before you really start recording, playing around with sound, doing tests and listening to it very carefully could be really important, because one of the things that will make your course immediately sound or seem very unprofessional is if your sound quality is low. So, and that means sound quality low, meaning there's a lot of like mechanical artifacts going on in sound, fans in the background, kids running around and screaming. That's easy to cut out. But a fan that's constant, you can't cut it out if that's coming in from where you're at. So understanding good quality sound and how to produce good quality sound is important. I had a couple examples, but we're going to skip those. Software. I use Camtasia. I like Camtasia. Costs about $250. If you're only on a Mac, you can use ScreenFlow. It's about $130. Has most of the same features of Camtasia. Camtasia works on both Mac and Windows. It's more expensive, but it's got more features than ScreenFlow. But ScreenFlow has most of the features of Camtasia, and you can use ScreenFlow to produce a course pretty much just as adequately as Camtasia until you get into really advanced stuff, and it is cheaper. Camtasia is cross-platform. The nice thing about Camtasia is I can record on a Windows box, and then I can edit on a Mac box if I need to. Clips. We talked a little bit about clips. One long clip. Anything for Linux. I don't know if ScreenFlow works for Linux or not, Shane, to be honest. And I don't know very well that. I think we had one author that was on Linux. And I don't remember what they ended up doing, or if they ended up not actually producing a course. So sorry, I don't have the answer for Linux. So for clips, multiple clips is always better. If you've ever gone and found that one YouTube video that's 8 hours long and that's a complete introduction to blah, I would bet dollars to donuts that you didn't finish that course, right? And a big reason is it's hard to figure out where you were in the middle. Even when they put in timestamps in a YouTube video, like, oh, this part is this, it's hard to pick back up and continue on. And usually whatever format you're in, YouTube is not a great course format. They don't have all the other things. It's not really a good player for courses. So multiple clips produced somewhere else is better. And we'll talk about where to publish at the end here. The ideal length of a clip. An ideal clip is around 6 minutes plus or minus 3. So 3 to 9 minutes is about the ideal length for a clip. Less than 3, not a problem, but you probably aren't covering very much. It might be an introduction to what we're going to cover, or you might quickly demonstrate the solution to an easy problem in under 3 minutes. But generally, to really teach something, you're talking over 3 minutes. But once you hit 9 minutes, that's getting pretty long. So my own personal rule is never over 10 minutes. And Pluralsight taught me that as well. They don't allow you to submit clips over 10 minutes long. One of the reasons is when somebody starts a clip, if they're, say, a lot of people consume courses during their lunch hour at work. If they start a clip, say that they're 10 minutes away from the end of their lunch break. Can they start your clip and get through it? If not, now what do they do with the last 10 minutes? They were watching your course. You've given them too big of it's too granular or not granular enough, too coarse of clips. So shorter clips are better so they can consume it in pieces and work through it. Because nobody's going to sit down and go through your whole course in one shot. If they are, they're not going to be very effective. So you want to give them options for that. Using slides, I'm going to kind of breeze through this one because I want to get through to some of the other content here before we end. So the most important thing is just to understand what to put in slides and what not to put in slides. Slides should have lists, introductions, and summaries. Those are great things for slides. Visuals that you can't really do in the actual code. But when it comes to actually teaching something that's coding related, always don't put the code in the slide. Don't throw your code into a slide and talk about it unless it's so complex that you're doing some complex visuals to show and highlight different things. 99.9% of the time, it's better to just put the code into the editor and talk about it. You can delete parts of the code, add to the code, grow it, shrink it, show it running. You can't do that in a slide. People, they're coding in Visual Studio Code, or they see you using it and coding in that, or another editor, another analogous editor. They're going to identify with that, and it's going to feel more visceral to them, right? But if you take it outside of it and put it in a slide, it gets more boring. Alfredo, good question. I'll get to that at the end. All right, I talked about the exceptions. For coding, showing the code grow, typing, then talking. This is a tip for logistics purposes, especially when you start out. Don't talk while you're typing, and don't type while you're talking. So if you're going to show how to do some binding, say, all right, I'm going to use the double curly braces here to do that binding. You say that, and then you shut up, and you type in the code, type in the double curly braces and the variable name. And if you're right in the middle of typing the variable name and you want to say something, stop typing and then say, notice here that I've blah, blah, blah. And you don't type while you talk. The reason is, especially when you're starting off, you're more likely to make mistakes while you're doing that. And that will cause you more logistic problems. So always separate out your talking and your typing, and it's okay. The user won't get bored. They're watching you type while you're typing. They're listening to you talk while you're talking, and you're not giving them anything boring. I talked about how to discuss code. Finally, drawing the eyes. This is very important that you draw the eyes. One of the big mistakes that I see is if you go back and forth between, say, two different code windows, you're tabbing back and forth between two different, say the template and the component. Know that the user is 5 seconds slower than you are as to looking at the right line of code that you're looking at. So keep that in mind. Give them more time to orient themselves and look at the code, especially when you're discussing code or discussing a piece of the code. Give them time. So doing callouts is usually the best thing. You can use line numbers. You can say, here on line 3, I blah, blah, blah. But don't just say, where I did blah, because they're just learning this code. They don't know where you did blah. Show them where you did blah. Tell them it was line 3. Or better yet, use a callout. So I'm going to just show you really quickly an example here of using a callout. Here's Camtasia. And here I've used a callout to show part of the screen. So I'm going to zoom in so this animates just a little bit slower. But notice right here, there's nothing. And then there's a callout, this blue border around this area over there on the right. The blue border comes in and shows the user what I'm talking about. I'm talking about whatever that thing is. And that blue border shows up. Here it is. Here's a blue border around code, right? So here there was nothing, and then the blue border appears around the code and then fades out. And you can't see it, but there's actually an animation that fades in and fades out. That lets the user know exactly what I'm talking about. Never, 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 never use your mouse to demonstrate code. And secondarily, almost never highlight it with your mouse and highlight the code you're talking about. Those are very poor forms. Highlighted code is almost always way less accessible and much more difficult, and especially on a lower resolution video that comes through and something adaptive like YouTube or a good player, it can make the colors even worse. And so you make it really hard for people to actually see what you're highlighting, and sometimes you obscure it when you highlight. So don't highlight. And your mouse is not a good... So there are some software out there that makes your mouse, you can like draw on things with the mouse. That's totally different. But if it's just your regular mouse, don't circle code or point at it. Use a callout. All right. Whether you should record your video and your sound together, I highly recommend you do them together. I've tried it myself, tried recording the video and then narrating afterwards, or recording the audio and then adding the video to it afterwards. And I know some authors who do this. I don't know if it was effective for them, but I tried it out and tested it against my regular method. It was much, much, much less effective and much harder. I always had to, if I recorded the video and then tried to narrate afterwards, which is the typical way, I always wanted to say more things than I had time to say, so I had to stop and extend the video. And I was constantly fiddling with both pieces. It made it much easier for me to narrate and to code and do the audio together at the same time. And to that extent, write a script. Script yourself out, especially at the beginning. Script out 100% of what you do. And then over time, I don't script what I do anymore. but that took me a few courses before I got comfortable with that. A good setup to record using 2 monitors. On one monitor is what I'm recording, and I set that to the recording resolution. And on the other monitor, I have my notes and the code that I'm coding up to. So this is the end result code. I don't trust myself enough to know that I'm going to get to the right code and actually code it in right. Over on my left is exactly what code I'm going to be coding in its finished state. So on my other monitor, so on the monitor that's recording, I'm slowly coding up, and I'm constantly referring to the finished code to make sure I'm coding that correctly. And then I also usually have notes, things that, I'll make sure I mention this, make sure I mention that. Dealing with mistakes, the number one thing to do to deal with mistakes is to give yourself a marker. So for example, if I was recording a course and I said, be sure and use the triple curly braces, and I realized, oh no, I said triple, it's double. Double's the right word. Crap, I just made a mistake. Now what do? I just go back and I say it over again. But I give myself a marker that lets me know that I made a mistake, so I can know to go in there and cut out the mistake. So then I'm going to give a marker, and a marker is an audio marker that shows up on the waveform, and I'll show you this in a second. But what it looks like is either clapping. Me personally, I click my tongue. I did this because when I was young, I rode horses, and you click your tongue to make the horse go faster. So I was pretty easy making that noise, and that's a good spike, and I'll show you this in a second. So I would say this mistake. Here I'm going to use the triple curly, and I click, and I say it over again. Here I'm going to use the double curly braces. And so you can see an example of that here and I'm going to try to make this big enough that it'll be easy for you to see here. And this is the edited version, so I'm going to go to the unedited version and zoom into one of these. And you can see here is one of my mistakes. See that big jagged line? That is me making that clicking noise. And it's the same thing if I clap. It'll look exactly the same. I know that that's not talking. That's not anything that would normally occur in the course. This is me making a mistake. So I can look at this and say, I was talking, and I made a mistake about here, and I started at the same point, and I was talking, and here I got through it because then I started saying something else, and then I made a mistake. So I can come in and just take this piece and just cut it out. And I rarely even have to listen to myself, and that makes my editing a lot more fast and easy. And we don't have time to go into all of this in great depth, but that's just a general tip for finding your mistakes. So using those audible markers. Sometimes it's okay to let the mistake live, especially if you made a mistake that you've typed in some incorrect code and now the thing is faulting. That might be a good opportunity to showcase to the user, this is a common mistake, forgetting to do blah. So I'm going to go back and now I'm going to show you that I'm going to fix that, right? And sometimes for me, this will happen. I'll pause the video and try to figure out what the heck I did. When I finally figure it out, and I'll go back and say, ooh, notice that this isn't compiling, give me this error. The reason is because I didn't do blah. And so then I go and I do blah. Now they see this common mistake, and that's okay. Inbal. So Inbal asks, so in the end result, a video could be multiple takes spliced together. Yes, it can, but let's look at what I did in this video. And let me show you. This clip has 3 source videos you can see in the upper left. This is source video 1. This is source video 2. Technically, this was kind of like 2 takes, but really it was more that I was doing this and I stopped for one reason or another. This has been so long since I did this. I don't know why I stopped at this moment. Maybe I got an interruption in the middle of recording. Maybe I screwed something up and I had to actually stop and reorient myself. But mostly I try to do it in one take, and all I do is just know how to, when I make a mistake, how to go back. And most of my mistakes and most of your mistakes you'll find are when you're talking. You say something wrong. And so you simply put in that audio marker and then talk again. That's not necessarily multiple takes or multiple videos per se. That's just me saying the same thing over. So the good thing is that to get the 10 minutes of video that I want, I might record 15 minutes of source video, and then I'm just editing out the mistakes. Right? But I don't have to say all 10 minutes perfectly and do it all perfectly. I can make plenty of mistakes in the middle and just edit them out and get rid of them. Isn't there also a video of you talking, which would affect? This is me talking. So this is me coding and talking. So if we were to look at this video here, and it's hard to see through this, but I'm coding and talking at the same time. So if I'm talking and I make a mistake, remember I'm not coding. So I'm not coding, and I talk and make a mistake, and now I got to figure out, oh crap, what was I coding? Where was the code at when I started talking? That's one of the reasons why I don't talk and type at the same time. I talk and type separately. So if I'm talking and I make a mistake, no big deal. If I'm coding and I make a mistake, no big deal. I could backspace up and then code the correct thing, and then I could just edit out the part where I was typing incorrectly. Because I'm not talking, it doesn't matter that I edit that out. It's quiet during that time. So I talk and type. These are getting into some more advanced things. What about sound effects? I don't use sound effects myself for anything, Marcin. So I don't know that I've seen very many courses that do use sound effects, but I don't use sound effects. If you talk about like some kind of special sound that gets added to the course, I don't do any of that myself. All right. The demonstration that we saw, that I kind of showed the difference between the unedited and the edited version. So let's get on to finishing up here. I want to talk about a few things that you do not need to produce a course. First off, you do not need to be an expert. For your first course, you should have some familiarity and some knowledge about the topic, but you don't have to be an expert. I knew nothing about Firebase before I started building the Firebase course. I did the research, I learned it, and I built the course on Firebase, and it's a great course on Firebase. So you do not need to be an expert. Really, you ever heard the piano teacher that's one lesson ahead of the student? That's not bad, because if you just learn something, you understand a lot of the challenges that the learners were going to go through when they try to learn something. So you're less likely to make the mistake of assuming something that the learner may not know. So it's okay to learn something and then teach it, right? Whatever it is, if you're only a 3 out of 10 in Angular, all the people that are 1 and 2 out of 10 in Angular are going to benefit from you teaching a course on Angular. By the time you're done teaching the course on Angular, you'll probably be a 4 or a 5. So never let your lack of expertise be a hindrance to you teaching a course. It is always good to make sure that you don't teach anything super incorrect, but what is super correct today is going to be incorrect tomorrow when the next version comes out, potentially. So never let that by itself be a hindrance or a thing that stops you from producing a course. I talked about this. It's one of the best ways to learn yourself. You do not need to have great English to teach a course. Most programming is done in English. To hit the widest audience, you want to produce your course in English, but there are certainly other languages for which, if you produce a course, will have a very wide audience. Chinese and Spanish are two that come right to mind. Okay. So you don't have to have great, but let's assume that you decided you wanted to produce the course in English because you're going to publish with a typically English production company, like say Udemy. And you think, well, I have an accent, and so people are going to be annoyed. You don't need to have great English. You do need to be able to read English clearly, right? So read from your script clearly. If you can improve the quality of your English and make your accent unpronounced enough that they can understand what you're saying while reading, and most people, their English is much better, or whatever language, a second language is always much better when they're reading from a script. They'll do a better job. And then you can just get help from somebody else to write the script. You can write most of the script. You can find somebody off Fiverr who will rewrite the script in better English for you. If you don't have a friend that will do it for you for free. Or if you're doing it in another language that isn't English, I'm saying English, but this applies to whatever language is your production language. You don't need to be native with no accent in whatever language you're going to produce your course, right? Just because you can script it all out and read from that. The things you do need to create a great course: you need time, you need discipline and commitment. This is why at Thinkster we actually charge $500 to put people through our authoring course. Right. And we go out to them. We reach out and find authors a lot of the time. Sometimes they come to us, but sometimes we go out and we find authors and we say, we'd like you to come and author a course. We think, it'd be great. People love you. We'd want you to come and author a course. And they say, cool. I don't know how to author courses. We say, no problem. We have this 10-hour-long course on how to author courses that we will put you through, but we will charge you $500 to go through our onboarding process. There's a reason we do that. One, we actually refund their money if they publish a course. But it causes them to put skin in the game, which means that they're more likely to actually accomplish the goal of getting the course done. We don't want to spend 10 or 20 hours on our side helping train somebody, working with them to get their course done and that sort of thing, and have them get partway through and then give up. But we also don't want them to waste their own time. If they're not really ready to start on the process of building a course, we don't want them to. So we charge $500 in order to let them go through our training material on how to author courses. You guys are getting kind of the highlights of this, but there's a lot more depth as far as how to use sound and software and how to do editing and how to create better exercises in various forms. So it's a very incomprehensive thing, but we actually charge $500, which we do refund once they actually publish a course. The other thing you need is a place to share your work. So you can self-publish, usually pretty cheap in a lot of different places. You can go publish it out on a place like Udemy, etc. So where are places to publish? So let's talk about self-publishing. That's something like Teachable or something else. Teachable, they have their fees and such. And so if you're going to be able to charge for the course and make a little bit of money, or you just like, I like Teachable. I think Teachable is great. I've got a fair amount of things published on Teachable, including our course, our authoring course is published on Teachable. It's a great place to go through, consume content. They have a great feature set. They do charge you some fees. So if you're not making money on the course and you don't have like a marketing plan on the course, that's going to be the real problem. It's one thing to create a course and it's an entirely different thing to market that course. They're 100% separate things. And if you want to get good viewpoints on that, just ask Shai. Shai, I know we've had a lot of conversations about spending as much, if not more time marketing courses than it takes to build them in order to produce reasonable income. So for that reason, I don't recommend self-publishing at all. I put self-publishing along the same lines as doing your own brain surgery, right? You're not, unless you were a marketer or if you already have 100 or 150,000 Twitter followers, self-publishing, of course, may be a viable option. If those things are not true, don't self-publish a course, find a place to publish it. Udemy is an okay place. It's pretty easy to actually get them to take a course and publish it. I never published a course on Udemy myself, so I know that they sometimes have some requirements. It's okay. They don't necessarily promote your course per se. So I would only just watch and say, is my course niche enough that there aren't already 4 courses or 5 courses or 10 courses on that same exact topic that already have ratings and high ratings and they're great courses and a lot of people have already watched them, in which case nobody's going to be watching my course. Finding something unique inside of Udemy is actually a viable option. There are other services, Pluralsight, Egghead. There's a large number of them out there. Those ones can be great. The problem is, are they necessarily looking for somebody to author a course for them? I know that Pluralsight and Egghead are not just like, we're always looking for authors. There are requirements there to author. But the good thing about those is they will market your course for you. So I always recommend using somebody like that to market. Finally, you can publish on Thinkster.io, my own platform that I run, and we market your course. Because unlike some of the other services, we're newer, we're a lot hungrier for authors. So we take first-time authors more often, and we take most courses more often. We have fewer courses published. So there's a lot more room to find a course that you want to publish. And you could publish with us, and then we just pay you royalties on the course that you publish. But there's a lot of there's no perfect place to publish. With every place, there's pros and cons. I happen to think that Thinkster is a great place. But depending on the course, you might make more money off of Udemy or someplace else. So if money is your number one concern, Thinkster may not be your best option if you can find it somewhere else. But Udemy is all over the place. When Swift first came out, the first person that published a course on Swift, they did it in almost like 2 weeks. They just went through all the docs and put it out there. They made a crap ton of money, tons of money. For everybody else, it wasn't so great. So that's kind of it. A couple of resources I want to mention. We're going to send out with these slides a PDF, with a bunch of best practices that we use. There's a book called Make It Stick. I love this book. It's all about teaching and education. One of my favorite books. I highly recommend getting that if you're interested in education. And finally, the book Resonate by Nancy Duarte, which is about presenting and how to present. It's mostly about like presenting talks, but also applies a lot to courses as well. It talks a lot about slides and things like that. Kind of the book on giving presentations. So those are things that I recommend for resources. And finally, Tech Course Creator. So this is, if you really are serious, our authoring course is available, and you can utilize that if you wish. As I said before, it's $500. It's technically listed at $800, but there's a discount on there to get it for $500. And you don't have to publish with Thinkster to use this course. It goes through what I've said and a lot more. And so if you're interested in that, that's the URL to go to the course, and you can buy the course. If you do happen to decide to publish a course with us, then we will refund you the cost of the course as well. So that's the other resource that's really good. This is actually a big, huge, long course on authoring courses as well. So last thing I want to do is, for those who want to hang out for a few extra minutes, is go back to our exercise. So it's good to have these hands-on exercises. So I'm just going to give the assignment. If you're interested in getting feedback on that, then please feel free. My DMs are open on Twitter. That's probably the easiest place to find me. Shoot me a DM, and then I'll have you email me your work, and I'll be happy to give you feedback on what you do. But this is a really good thing to try to work through exercises, and that is to create a sample exercise where you try to have somebody practice doing. And I chose the exercise of template binding. It's very simple and easy to understand. But put together an exercise on StackBlitz where you tell somebody, hey, do this access, and work through that process, even if you don't submit it to me for feedback. But working through that will show you what the mechanics of what it takes to actually produce an exercise. And then when you're actually building a course, you'll have a better idea of creating exercises. But when you say, I've just taught you how to do basic template binding in Angular. Now here's an exercise I want you to practice doing basic template binding, and walk through that exercise. That will really help you cement in your mind the effort that it takes and the work that it takes to create a good exercise. Here at Thinkster, right, that's what we mostly focus on, because the best explainer can only give you 15% repetition or retention. The worst hands-on exercise is 75% retention. So the worst explainer with hands-on exercises will always beat the best explainer 100% of the time. So work through that exercise on your own when you have time. If you really are serious about doing hands-on courses, and if you wish, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions about anything that we talked about today. And we do have one Q&A question to go over here that I'll go over here in a second about written courses. But I'm happy to talk about anything that we talked about today. If you're interested in Tech Course Creator and have any more questions about it, reach out or go hit the URL as well. But I'd love to have people come and author courses over on Thinkster for us, or I'd love to just teach you how to author courses and let you publish wherever it is that you want. It's a passion of mine. Happy to do it all. So thanks, everybody, for those who stayed around. Here we are, 9 minutes over the hour. Appreciate all the time that you spent with me today to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. And then we'll go through Q&A. It looks like we've got a couple of answers. So we'll move into that now. Again, thanks, everybody. And thanks, Shai, for coming and hanging out and busting my chops. All right, so Alfredo asks, what are my recommendations for written courses that don't include video, like interactive books or websites? I think they're great. I certainly have less experience myself with those types of things. I've gone through some like interactive games and such. The interactive stuff is really hard unless somebody has an existing platform that you can author within their platform. If you know something like that. One thing that comes to mind is Scrimba. Scrimba isn't really great. I actually don't love Scrimba. If you've ever taken a Scrimba course, you could pause in the middle and actually adjust the code. I think it's cool, but in the end, I think it's gimmicky because, again, what matters is getting an exercise that stretches you and working through that. The playground thing where you play around with stuff sometimes can teach you stuff, but a lot of time it can just be a waste of time. So I'm not really a big fan of Scrimba overall. But for non-video courses that are written, and Thinkster actually has a fair number of non-video courses. They're just written out courses where we do include links to StackBlitz exercises. I think they're great. Video is always just a step up. So when it comes to charging money, if you want to make money, I wouldn't recommend written courses. I think that the likelihood that you'll get people to buy a written course is much lower than getting somebody to buy a video course, but it takes much less time and it's tons easier to keep up to date. So those are the benefits of it. Using it maybe as marketing, getting people to come and do that, and then getting them to take a video course, probably a little bit easier. But getting them to actually pay for a written course, I think you'll have a little bit harder time doing that. If you want to, but if you're using it for something else, then that could be effective. So those are kind of my thoughts on that one. Okay, it looks like that was it. The other question disappeared. So
Well, the other question, the person hopped off already.
Oh,
They were going to plan on trying to get in touch with you to ask some questions. So
cool. So if there's no more questions, thanks everybody for sticking around to the end. And yeah, thanks
And,
for helping out.
yeah, thank you for having me.
Do we have
Also-
our final poll?